The chilly October morning of 2013 began with an unusual commotion on a quiet street in the town of Montrose, Colorado. 5 unmarked police cars silently pulled up in front of a modest single-story house, a place where the morning calm was rarely disrupted. Neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, quietly watching as officers in tactical jackets fanned out to surround the property. Inside, 39-year-old Emily Hartwell was brewing her morning coffee, a routine she had maintained for years as a discreet accountant, an unremarkable neighbor, and a woman whose life appeared entirely ordinary. A rapid knock sounded at 10:14 a.m. Emily Hartwell, Gunnison County Sheriff's Office. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the 1994 disappearance of Lucas Moreno." The officers later described how her hand trembled slightly as she set the mug down on the counter, but her face remained inexplicably calm, as if this moment had been anticipated for nearly 2 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The night of October 11, 1994, Gunnison was enveloped in the thick early winter cold, like the breath of the mountains pressing down on the dark, narrow streets. The Silver Elk Bar still flickered with faint yellow lights when 27-year-old Deputy Sheriff Lucas Moreno stepped out the door just before 10 o'clock. Witnesses sitting at a table near the window said they saw Lucas leaving with Emily Hartwell, their silhouettes reflected on the thin layer of frost covering the car windows in the parking lot. They said they couldn't hear the conversation clearly, only noticing that Emily seemed slightly tense, her gaze shifting away whenever Lucas turned to look at her. Lucas walked ahead, his tall frame standing out under the sparse streetlights, striding quickly through the shadows between the cars. Before getting into the green Ford Bronco he often drove on mountain patrol routes. The engine started right away, the sound echoing softly in the freezing air, and the vehicle slowly rolled out of the lot, heading toward Kebler Pass, the route he said he would take before going home. Emily left in a different direction, her small figure gradually disappearing into the darkness, her face briefly showing tension that left the witnesses wondering what had happened between them. The sky grew darker. There was no moon, only the towering West Elk Range in the distance, sending down piercing cold winds that whipped through the pine rows, twisting the air into an uncomfortable stillness. The temperature dropped rapidly, breaths turning to white vapor, and the route home for Lucas, which normally took just 15 minutes, sank into complete silence. Nothing but the wind whistling through the frozen road signs. Lucas did not return home as usual. By midnight, his family began calling his personal radio, but got no response. At 1 a.m., Brandon Ashford, Lucas's close friend and Emily's husband, called Lucas's family to ask if he had stopped by. No one knew anything more. Time passed slowly. The porch light at Lucas's house remained on, calls continued to go to dead zones, and an uneasy atmosphere crept into every room of the small town still asleep in the cold. By 5:30 a.m. the next morning, with Gunnison skies still covered in the deep gray of lingering night, Lucas's family and Brandon Ashford made the final decision and called the police, officially reporting Lucas Moreno missing after a night with no sign of contact. Just minutes later, at the duty office, Sheriff Ray Dalton picked up the phone, listening to the trembling yet composed voice on the other end, repeatedly emphasizing that Lucas had never turned off his radio, never disappeared overnight without notice, and this prolonged silence was something that had never happened before. Dalton noted every detail on the standard Gunnison County Sheriff's form, then opened a missing person file according to Colorado's 1994 procedures, confirming the last known sighting of the victim, describing the vehicle, circumstances before disappearance, personal information, and possibilities of self-harm or leaving town. He then personally went to Lucas's home on the outskirts of Gunnison, where the kitchen light was still on and the coffee cup on the table had gone cold from the previous night. Inside, everything indicated Lucas had intended to return the evening before, his usual jacket hanging on the door hook, his police uniform neatly folded on the table, the next day's schedule unchanged, his motorcycle still in the garage, and his personal firearm in its proper place in the safe. On the kitchen table, The spare house key was untouched, and Lucas's wallet was complete. Dalton silently checked every room, with a clear sense that Lucas had not prepared for any extended trip. No suitcase, no documents taken, no signs he had voluntarily left town. As he left Lucas's house, Dalton received information from a delivery driver. He had seen a green Ford Bronco like Lucas's parked off the shoulder near the entrance to Kebler Pass, about a 20-minute drive from town. Dalton immediately dispatched a patrol team to the reported location while driving straight up the pass himself. When he arrived, the Bronco was indeed Lucas's, parked motionless on the frozen ground, its rear facing the thickly wooded drop-off, with frost condensed in patches on the windshield. No one was there, and there were no obvious signs of a struggle or altercation. Dalton and the patrol team only marked the scene preliminarily, noting the vehicle's position, photographing various angles, setting stakes to mark the area boundaries, and taping off a narrow perimeter, following standard procedures at the time, but not conducting in-depth analysis, since there were no urgent indicators requiring immediate escalation. However, the vehicle's location was completely inconsistent with Lucas's usual route, a detail that led Dalton to decide to expand the search scope before considering other hypotheses. By 7:20 a.m., he ordered an initial 1-mile search radius around the Bronco, extending along the pass slope and down into the dense pine forest below, while requesting the SAR team to deploy immediately upon arrival. The morning air was bitterly cold, winds from the West Elk Range bending the barrier tape, and Dalton knew that if Lucas had left the vehicle that night, he had likely entered a treacherous area where darkness could erase all traces in just hours. Thus, when the Gunnison County SAR team arrived, they immediately got to work, deploying in a spiral formation, starting from the Ford Bronco's position and expanding outward meter by meter within the designated 1-mile radius. SAR members moved in lines, spaced about 3 meters apart, eyes constantly scanning the ground, low branches, and rock crevices along the roadside. K9 units were brought in right away. A purebred German Shepherd thoroughly sniffed the driver's seat, steering wheel and door handle to pick up Lucas's scent before the handler started leading it down the mountainside. Initially, it pulled strongly northwest, nose pressed to the ground, moving quickly in a wide arc. But just a few dozen meters later, wind swirling down from the West Elk Range into the valley caused it to lose the trail completely. The handler tried twice more, changing approach directions, but each time the wind shifted, the scent was wiped clean. The extreme cold and swirling air through the mountain gullies made human scent unable to persist overnight. Overhead, a Bell 206 helicopter scanned the steep slopes in a grid pattern, flying low enough that the rotor wash scattered fine snow from the tree trunks. The pilot and observer focused on clearings amid dense forest blocks, high slope rock crevices over 40 degrees, and unusually compressed vegetation, places where a hiker might slip or get trapped. They flew along the north slope for about 10 minutes, then shifted to the east slope and the basin area below the valley, but saw no human figure or movement traces. On the ground, the SAR team continued expanding the search circle, checking fallen trees, narrow trails leading to dry stream beds, and uneven snow-covered areas, sometimes pausing for seconds to examine depressions closely. However, no one found any sign of Lucas, no footprints, no dropped items, no collapsed snow patches, no suspiciously broken branches. With each step, the surrounding forest responded only with uncomfortable silence, as if any traces that might have existed had long been swept away, or never existed at all. After more than 2 hours, the SAR team leader marked 3 highest-risk areas within the search zone. First, the western cliff edge, where rock dropped abruptly and was covered in slippery moss. Second, the thick eastern pine forest where uneven terrain could cause a hiker to fall into hidden rock pits. And third, a narrow gorge leading to a dry stream bed, where temperatures were noticeably lower and wind funneled continuously through a natural tunnel. These 3 areas were flagged with red stakes for more intensive sweeps at midday, when light was stronger and the helicopter could fly lower safely. But by this point, there was still no indication of which direction Lucas had left the vehicle, or whether he had passed through any of those danger points. Everything only recounted a night of fierce winds, plunging temperatures, and the complete disappearance of a person without leaving any trace. As the search team temporarily shifted to checking the 3 marked areas, Sheriff Ray Dalton returned to the Ford Bronco's position to conduct a more systematic scene documentation before any in-depth analysis or evidence collection was undertaken. He began by directing the deputy forensic technician to photograph the entire area in standard sequence. Wide shots from 10 meters away, mid-range from all 4 sides, then close-ups of every vehicle angle, tires, undercarriage and windows. Then Dalton opened his field notebook, sketching the vehicle's position using a compass and stakes. The Bronco was noted as parked at about a 27-degree angle from the main road direction, nose pointing southeast, tail close to the small slope dropping to the low pines below. The thin remaining snow along the shoulder showed the vehicle had been parked long enough for wind to blur approach tire tracks, but enough shading remained for Dalton to estimate it had arrived from town, rather than emerging from the forest. Standing at the hood, he placed his hand on the engine cover. It was completely cold, confirming the engine had not run for hours, consistent with Lucas leaving the night before. He bent down to check the distance between the front wheels and the road edge, noting the wheels were turned slightly left, a very small but clear intentional steering angle, rather than from sliding. The small pile of dirt and rocks near the rear wheel also indicated the tail had been positioned normally. If the vehicle had slid, dirt streaks would be elongated downhill, but here the low slope and mostly intact dirt meant the vehicle was parked, not randomly moved. Dalton carefully opened the driver's door just for initial observation, touching nothing inside since evidence collection had not yet begun. The driver's seat was pushed back farther than colleagues described as Lucas's habit. The interior rearview mirror was also off from his usual nighttime adjustment. On the dashboard, lights were normal, no unusual warnings. The key was in the off position rather than exec, indicating the driver had fully shut off the engine rather than stopping hastily or being forced to leave suddenly. The doors showed no signs of prying or forcing, and the fine dust on the exterior handle was mostly undisturbed except for light normal opening pressure. When Dalton moved to the passenger side and examined the rear tire, he noted grass blades pressed flat, marks made when the driver stood outside the driver's seat, turning back to check parking position or distance to the edge. This further reinforced that Lucas or someone had intentionally parked in this exact spot, not that the vehicle had slid to the edge and stopped. Dalton continued around to the rear, looking over the slope to the dense trees below. If the vehicle had slid, it likely wouldn't have stopped right at this edge. The slope wasn't gentle enough to hold an uncontrolled vehicle, but rather tended to pull it deeper. Additionally, the gravel and dry grass immediately behind the rear wheels were completely undisturbed. Dalton recorded all findings in the report, particularly underlining one line: vehicle intentionally parked. No slide marks, no collision signs. He also requested the forensic technician measure distances from the vehicle to the drop-off, determine road incline, and photograph slope angles in potential movement directions. All these measurements would later be compared to slide possibilities under the weather conditions of October 11th night. No step in processing the Bronco was rushed. Dalton strictly adhered to not collecting interior evidence at this stage to ensure evaluations remained objective, uninfluenced by early assumptions. He stepped back a few paces, observing the overall scene from afar. The Bronco stood there like an abandoned object on the cold ground, standing out almost disruptively against the surrounding landscape, like a giant question mark hanging over the empty pass. Every detail, from steering angle, wheel position, to engine shutdown, indicated the parker had done so in full control, with no signs of panic or disorientation. But that person, whether Lucas or someone else, had vanished without leaving footprints, drag marks, or any movement signs around the vehicle. Only the Bronco remained silent, the sole witness to the final moment before Lucas disappeared into the frigid night of Kebler Pass. It was precisely this unusual silence that prompted Sheriff Ray Dalton to shift the focus of the investigation back to Gunnison that very afternoon. Because if the Bronco scene showed no signs of a struggle or accident, then the most important clue still had to start from the last place Lucas was seen, the bar called the Silver Elk. As he stepped inside, the dim golden light of the bar, the smell of old wood, the hum of the heater, everything remained exactly as it had been on the night of 10/11 events, causing everyone in the place to freeze when they saw the sheriff's badge. Bartender Amy Willis, the one working the evening shift that night, set down the glass she was wiping and agreed to cooperate immediately. In the small beer storage room out back, Dalton turned on the recorder and asked Amy to recount everything she remembered. Amy said Lucas arrived at the bar a little after 8:30 p.m., sat alone at a table by the window, and drank only one bourbon. What she remembered very clearly was his mood. Not like the usual times. He kept checking his watch, tapping his fingers on the table. Really tense, like he was waiting for someone or worried about something. When Dalton asked if Lucas had argued or had any unusual interaction with anyone, Amy shook her head, but confirmed that around 9:40, Emily Hartwell, the one said to have left the bar after Lucas, had actually been there much longer than what she had claimed that morning. In her morning statement, Emily said she only stopped by for 10-15 minutes before Lucas left, but according to Amy, Emily arrived around 9:20 and sat at the bar, about 4 tables away from Lucas. Dalton asked Amy to describe any interaction between the two. Amy said she didn't see them talk, but Lucas kept glancing toward Emily, and Emily was drinking faster than usual. When Lucas stood up to pay and left the bar, Amy remembered his face looking stiff and cold, completely different from his usual gentle personality. A regular customer, Bill Tanner, walked into the room when he saw the interview taking place and offered additional information. He said he had been standing at the door after Lucas left, so he clearly saw him cross the frost-covered parking lot toward the blue Bronco. More importantly, Bill said that just about 2 minutes later, he saw Emily leave the bar, much earlier than what she had claimed, and her face was very tense, like she was arguing with herself in her head. Bill said he didn't see them talk in the parking lot, but he remembered Emily looking toward the Bronco before turning onto the small side road next to the bar. Dalton carefully noted every detail because this created a notable time discrepancy between Emily's statement and reality. He continued interviewing 3 other regulars, an elderly couple and a student from Western Colorado University. All 3 agreed that Lucas left the bar just before 10 o'clock, headed straight to the parking lot without stopping or turning back. 2 of them confirmed seeing Emily leave a short while after Lucas, but not in the same direction. These statements helped Dalton begin building a detailed timeline. Back at the large table in the middle of the bar, he opened his notebook and used a pencil to create vertical columns for time, location, witness, and events. 9:20 p.m. Emily enters the bar, per Amy. 9:30, 9:40, Lucas, sitting alone, showing signs of tension. 9:40, Emily still in the bar, drinking her second beer. Luke stands up, pays, leaves the bar, heads toward the parking lot. 9:52, Emily leaves the bar, initially toward the parking lot, but then veers onto the side road. 9:53, 9:55, Lucas, seen entering the Bronco and starting the engine. 10 o'clock, Bronco leaves the lot toward the boulevard, leading to Highway 135 toward Kebler Pass. Creating this timeline allowed Dalton to clearly see that Emily had been in the bar longer than she claimed, and that the 2 left just a few minutes apart, not with the large gap Emily described that morning. There was no evidence they met in the parking lot, but the close timing and both of their tense states were important pieces of the puzzle. Dalton returned to the bar counter and asked Amy one last time if Lucas had received a call, read a note, or had contact with any stranger that night. Amy firmly stated, no phone, no messages, no strangers, just Emily, and both of them were not acting normal. As he stepped out of the Silver Elk, Dalton paused on the porch for a moment, looking down at the parking lot, where a layer of afternoon frost covered the pavement. This might be the last place Lucas was seen while everything was still normal before falling into the mysterious void that stretched all the way to Kebler Pass. The bar didn't give him many answers, but it opened up bigger questions, especially surrounding Emily Hartwell and the timing of her departure from the bar. That was why, late that afternoon, as the autumn sunlight turned a coppery red and a thin layer of mist began to spread over the town's central lake, Emily was summoned to the Gunnison Sheriff's Office for her first interview, a session that, from the very moment it began, carried a heavy feeling as though time itself was slowing down to wait for the story to unfold. Sheriff Dalton sat across from Emily in the small interview room with only a metal table, a recorder, and cold white light shining straight down onto the surface. Emily appeared calmer than Dalton had expected, even somewhat prepared, as if she had thought through every answer since the night Lucas disappeared. When asked to recount her timeline for the evening of 10 events, she presented a smooth ABC sequence of events that felt unnaturally polished. According to Emily, she arrived at the Silver Elk around 9:45 p.m. just to pick up something Emily had left there the previous afternoon. Then left almost immediately, went straight back to her lodging at Tomichi Village Inn, called a friend in Denver from 10:15 until nearly 11 o'clock, and then went to sleep. She insisted she did not encounter Lucas in the parking lot, did not go in the same direction, and had no interaction with him that night. Dalton listened, noting each time marker, without interrupting. What particularly caught his attention was Emily mentioning the nearly 45-minute call, something that, if true, could be fully verified through the inn's landline records. However, when Dalton asked for the friend's phone number, Emily hesitated for a few seconds before saying she didn't remember the exact number, just the name Mara. That brief delay was enough for Dalton to put a question mark in his notebook. When comparing the timeline Emily had just provided with the one built from bar witnesses, the gap between the two versions became too large to ignore. According to Amy and Bill Tanner, Emily was at the bar from 9:20 and only left around 9:52, while Emily claimed she arrived at 9:45 and left within minutes. When Dalton presented the witness information, Emily insisted they mistook her for someone else and that she didn't want to be dragged into this, but could not explain why multiple people clearly remembered her position and actions. Dalton kept his tone neutral, avoiding pressing too hard without physical evidence. He moved on to questions about the moment she left the bar, walking or driving, which direction did she stop to talk to anyone, did she see Lucas leave? Emily answered steadily, her expression barely changing. She said she walked around to the back of the bar, got into her Honda Civic, and left immediately toward Highway 50. When asked if she remembered the exact time, Emily said around 9:55, matching the time frame Bill said Lucas started the Bronco, but completely different in direction of travel. Dalton continued asking about the tense expression witnesses described when Emily left, but Emily replied she was just stressed from work and didn't remember looking that way. The small but persistent inconsistencies in her responses caused Dalton's notes to fill with more and more red underlines. After finishing the timeline portion, Dalton asked Emily to describe her clothing that night. She said she wore a black jacket, gray jeans, and a thin wool scarf. The bar witnesses' descriptions were fairly similar, so Dalton noted it, but did not mention a few other details he had overheard at the bar counter. For example, that Emily was carrying a small canvas bag. That would be a detail to verify later with a search warrant. Dalton then checked how well Emily's account aligned with the known timing of Lucas leaving the bar and heading toward Kebler Pass. When he asked what she did from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock, the answer "called my friend in Denver" came up again, but without any supporting evidence. Emily didn't remember the number, didn't remember the exact length, wasn't sure if the friend picked up right away, a level of vagueness too great for such a critical alibi. When Dalton asked why she hadn't mentioned this long call that morning, when police came to Lucas's house, Emily said she was too panicked that day to remember. The answer sounded reasonable on the surface, but was not convincing given how recent the events were and how directly they related to the time of Lucas's disappearance. By the end of the interview, Dalton summarized the unclear points. Emily's time at the bar, off by 20-25 minutes. Departure time, off by 10-15 minutes. And most importantly, a 50-70-minute gap from 9:52 to 11 o'clock that was completely unverifiable based on her word alone. He wrote clearly in the file. Timeline inconsistent with independent witnesses, no corroborating evidence provided. Gap approximately 50-70 minutes remains unaccounted for. But since there was no physical evidence, no signs of a struggle, no legal indicators strong enough to turn the session into a formal interrogation, Dalton maintained a calm demeanor and ended the interview with a routine thank you. As Emily left the office, her steps were slightly quicker than normal, her hand gripping the bag strap tightly, a small detail, but enough for Dalton to add to his notebook. Subject appears tense upon exit, and that was all they could do in the first interview. A smooth but mismatched timeline, a witness with many unclear points, and a large unfillable time gap. Immediately after the first interview with Emily Hartwell, Sheriff Dalton returned to his office, spread out all his notes, statements, and reports on the desk, and began the work he believed would determine the direction of the entire investigation, reconstructing the 24-hour timeline before Lucas Moreno disappeared, even expanding it to 48 hours to avoid missing subtle behavioral changes. Dalton drew a timeline with pencil, marking every important hour from the morning of 10/10 to the evening of October 11, 1994. Cross-referencing work records, duty logs, accounts from colleagues at the sheriff's office, and what the family recalled. According to records, on the morning of 10/10, Lucas worked a shift from 7 o'clock to 15 o'clock, handling 3 local calls, all minor incidents in town. But the notable point was that around 16:30 that afternoon, Lucas met Brandon Ashford, business consultant at Gunnison Utilities, and Lucas's close friend since adolescence, in the county building parking lot. The meeting was seen by 2 office employees. According to one, no one raised their voice, but the atmosphere was pretty tense. Lucas's face was red, and Brandon kept pointing. Dalton immediately noted, confrontation, 10/10, approx. 16:30. No one knew the content of the argument, but Brandon's appearance in the 24 hours before the disappearance demanded attention. Continuing the review, Dalton identified the last people to have contact with Lucas in those 2 days as 3 key individuals: Brandon Ashford, Emily Hartwell, and a third mechanic, Daniel Kessler, who replaced the spark plugs in the Bronco on the morning of 10/11. When questioned, Kessler said Lucas arrived at the shop around 8:15, seemed tired, but not drunk, and asked very detailed questions about the possibility of the vehicle stalling while climbing mountain roads. This prompted Dalton to add another red note: Lucas concerned about Bronco reliability prior to disappearance. After leaving the shop around 9 o'clock, Lucas drove home, changed clothes, and left at 11 o'clock to meet Deputy Carl Wheaton at the sheriff's office to discuss an internal report. Wheaton confirmed they talked for about 45 minutes, mostly about cleaning out the evidence storage. No unusual behavior. Lucas returned home at 12:20, had lunch with his mother and brother for about 30 minutes. According to the family, Lucas seemed a bit distracted, but still conversed normally. 13 o'clock, 15 o'clock, Lucas visited Brandon's house as previously arranged to discuss Brandon wanting his help, signing a safety inspection document for a small plant outside town, a task not actually part of Lucas's duties. This meeting only had one-sided accounts from Brandon's family, since Brandon initially refused to cooperate. According to his mother, the conversation was nothing unusual, but no one could explain why Lucas left early and not as cheerful as usual. Quincy Vint, Diocese. Lucas drove home via Ohio Creek Road. A local farmer reported seeing Lucas pull over for about 5 minutes, looking like he was thinking or waiting for someone, but no one else appeared. 17 o'clock. Lucas called Deputy Wheaton again to ask about a minor administrative file, something Dalton noted because Lucas rarely called twice in one day about a small matter. 18 o'clock, 19 o'clock. Lucas at home, showered and changed clothes. The family confirmed there were no signs he was preparing for trouble or leaving with an unusual attitude, but they did notice him checking his car keys twice, a habit not common for him. 19:30. Lucas left home toward downtown. An employee at the Sinclair gas station confirmed he stopped to buy coffee and a protein bar. Mood normal. 20 o'clock, 20:30. Lucas seen at the Silver Elk per bartender and regulars. He chose the table by the window, didn't talk to anyone, occasionally looked out into the dark. The only person he glanced at multiple times was Emily. 21:20. Brandon Ashford, seen driving his Chevy Blazer through the downtown area, per saying a witness working at the tailor shop across from the bar. This didn't prove Brandon was looking for Lucas, but the timing led Dalton to add another red line on the timeline. 21:40, 21:50. Witnesses said Lucas became noticeably more tense, constantly checking his watch. Emily still in the bar, longer than claimed. 21:50. Lucas leaves the bar. 21:50. Emily leaves the bar. 21:50. 21:50. Lucas gets into the Bronco. 22 o'clock. Bronco leaves the lot toward Kebler Pass. In that timeline, Dalton noticed a pattern, a sequence of regulated behavior. Lucas showed multiple anomalies in the 36 hours before disappearing. Whereas normally, he was extremely consistent in his habits. The fact that Lucas consecutively met 3 people, Brandon, Kessler, and Emily, in a short period, combined with the tense state witnesses recorded at the bar, made Dalton realize these pieces could not be viewed in isolation. They had to be placed side by side to explain why Lucas left town in such an unsettled state. But the standout was still the argument between Lucas and Brandon 2 days before he vanished, a detail Dalton underlined heavily at the end of the timeline. Primary focus: what happened between Lucas and Brandon on 10/10 may explain 11/10 behavior. That became the next primary investigative direction. And it was on the 3rd morning of the search operation that, after Dalton had finalized the timeline and pinpointed the critical nodes in Lucas's final 48 hours, he decided to expand the search area to the secondary forest west of the route, up Kebler Pass, a rugged terrain dense with vegetation and rock crevices, where the SAR team had to advance in small groups. The early morning sunlight only penetrated in narrow strips, leaving most of the ground in a damp gray-green hue, with mist rising from the layer of decaying leaves, making the atmosphere gloomy like a cold greenhouse. The search team spread out into 3 prongs, each about 150 meters apart, to avoid missing even the smallest traces. This secondary forest was vast but unusually dense, fallen tree trunks interspersed, vines tangled into large patches, and many sudden steep drops like ravine mouths. This area was often hit by crosswinds from the West Elk Mountains, so human scents or organic traces could be erased in just a few hours, but Dalton believed that if Lucas had left the Bronco and walked in a different direction, he likely crossed through this zone. The radios crackled continuously as teams reported cleared positions, but there was nothing beyond dirt and rocks, animal footprints, and rotted tree stumps. Around 11 a.m., when the southwestern prong reached a narrow trail surrounded by large tree trunks, Deputy Wheaton, the one most familiar with the terrain in the team, spotted a small object lying askew under dry leaves. At first he thought it was just old tourist litter, but upon bending down, he realized it was a glove. Wheaton immediately radioed in, requesting the forensics team on standby, but per 1994 protocol, they could not collect it yet, only document the scene first. Dalton arrived minutes later, examining the glove from about a meter away. It was a brown leather glove, common in Colorado, impossible to determine the user's gender, with no distinctive markings. What caught Dalton's attention was that the glove was positioned angled downhill, as if dropped while someone slipped or tried to grab a tree trunk. But he wasn't allowed to jump to conclusions, as many people had passed through this route over the years. A ring of wooden stakes was placed around it, marking the first suspected area. When the SAR team expanded to the northern prong of the secondary forest, Deputy Ortiz reported seeing an unusual strip of dark green on low bushes. Dalton immediately moved there with the scene documentation specialist. Among the sparse branches, they found a small piece of fabric, about 1.5 inches wide, dark green in color. The fabric was torn in a jagged edge, as if snagged on a rough branch, and ripped as someone passed by. But the color made Dalton pause for a few seconds. It was the shade of green found only on certain winter jacket styles that year, including the model Lucas often wore to work and on mountain drives. However, Dalton couldn't conclude anything, as this green was also common on many other jackets. 1994 forensic standards couldn't immediately identify the fabric type without collecting a sample, which they weren't yet permitted to do. They could only photograph, sketch a diagram, and seal the scene. The wind picked up as noon approached, blowing leaves into the marked area, forcing the team to temporarily cover it with a tarp to preserve the evidence positions before the forensics team arrived for macro photos. Dalton stood still for a moment, observing the forest direction. If the fabric was torn from brushing against something, the person passing might have been moving downhill or fallen and dragged their sleeve. But with no additional signs of struggle or heavy dragging, he couldn't link it to the glove found earlier. As the team extended another 200 meters westward, they entered an area with sinking ground and many rotted trunks crossing like steps. A young SR member named Cooper nearly tripped over a long plastic object. Upon bending down to check, he realized it was a half-liter water bottle, Glacier Springs brand, common at town convenience stores. The bottle was dented on one side, apparently from a hard drop onto rocks. The cap was still tightly on but not full. There were dirt marks at the bottom, meaning it had rolled a few times before stopping. Dalton arrived again, staring at the bottle for a long time. Lucas usually carried water on mountain drives, confirmed by family, but like the other evidence, the bottle had no unique identifiers and could belong to any hiker over the years. No fingerprints visible to the naked eye, and Gunnison County's 1994 technology only allowed basic lifts on smooth surfaces, but that couldn't be done yet without collection approval. Dalton ordered a third stake ring around the area, then noted in his log, 3 possible items, no direct link to victim must preserve scene. As the search team compiled reports, Dalton looked at the marked map, the glove in the southwest, the fabric scrap in the north, and the water bottle in the center, forming an irregular triangle. The distances between the 3 points were too far to conclude they were dropped along a straight path, but not far enough to rule out connection to the same movement. Winds here often shifted hourly, allowing light objects to move randomly, but 3 items appearing within a few hundred meters radius was too coincidental to dismiss as ordinary trash. Dalton ordered SAR to scan every slope section around the 3 areas for slip marks, fresh soil furrows, or broken branches. After an hour, they found only a few low broken twigs, likely from animal movement. No human footprints, no second fabric piece, no other items. Dalton felt the familiar frustration of mountain searches. Traces often appeared scattered, without pattern, and nothing proved they belonged to Lucas. But he still logged everything, because the smallest details sometimes became key pieces when other parts of the picture emerged. That afternoon, as the search team packed up to head back, the 3 marked areas became the day's only focus: a nameless glove, a green fabric scrap, a dropped water bottle. The first 3 potential evidences after 3 days of searching, but in 1994, they were all just disconnected fragments that said nothing definitive. They might belong to Lucas, to someone else, or be entirely meaningless. But Dalton knew one thing: they were the first signs that the western forest was no longer as silent as they had thought. Right after the search team returned from the western secondary forest with 3 scattered items, but insufficient legal value to confirm relation to Lucas, Sheriff Dalton went back to the office and began what he considered the backbone of the early investigation phase: reconstructing Lucas's movements on the night of disappearance using every available data, gas station camera, bar receipt, witness statements, road characteristics, and timelines built from the prior 48 hours. This was a step Dalton always valued, because without solid evidence, without a body, and without a clear direction of travel, the timeline was the only thread connecting the final minutes before a person vanished into darkness. He started from the clearest marker, the Sinclair gas station camera on Main Street. The camera wasn't advanced, low resolution, black and white frames only, no audio, but it provided images clear enough to identify vehicles. The tape showed Lucas stopping at 1932, buying a hot coffee and a protein bar, then leaving around 1936. Though this detail wasn't directly tied to the disappearance time, it confirmed Lucas was using the Ford Bronco before the bar, and the vehicle was operating normally before 20 o'clock. From there, Dalton marked on the map the likely route Lucas took, Main Street, Taylor River Road, turning into the Central Road to the Silver Elk. The bar receipt confirmed Lucas paid for a bourbon at 21:48. Witnesses said he left around 21:50, 21:52. Bill Tanner heard the Bronco engine start around 21:53 or 21:55. Based on the distance from the bar parking lot to the main road, Dalton calculated it typically took about 2 minutes to exit the lot and merge onto the highway, meaning Lucas left downtown around 21:55, 21:57. From there, he sketched one of 3 possible routes. Lucas might have taken one heading home via the usual path, 2 turning toward the lodge where Emily stayed, or 3 going straight toward Kebler Pass, the route where the Bronco was ultimately found. Dalton reviewed tire tracks near town, reported by early morning patrols, tracks not fully erased by the previous night's snow. The wide treads matched the tires Lucas used on the Bronco, Cooper Discoverer, size 235/75 R15. Though common in the area, combined with tread direction and fine gravel still on the road, Dalton saw high likelihood the Bronco headed west from downtown, toward Kebler Pass, matching a witness hearing the engine echo that way that night. The next step was pinpointing where Lucas lost signal. Lucas's personal radio was usually on continuously when driving at night, but from about 22:15 to 22:25, the sheriff's station received no signal from it. Impossible to know exactly when he turned it off. It was turned off, or signal dropped at a spot on the pass. However, Dalton knew one thing: starting at mile 7 on Kebler Pass, the mountains blocked signal, and if the Bronco appeared roadside near the found spot, Lucas entered weak signal zone around 22:20. Thus, the time from leaving the bar near 22 o'clock to entering no signal was entirely reasonable. Dalton spread the topographic map on his desk, aligning Lucas's path, tapping his pen rhythmically on segments, carefully noting places where Lucas might have been forced to stop or stopped voluntarily. He marked 22:03 as bar departure, 22:15, 22:20 as entering no signal. Importantly, based on average Bronco speed on mountain roads, about 30-35 mph, this timing fit perfectly for Lucas to reach near the found Bronco spot by 22:25, 22:30. That was the estimated last time Lucas was alive, but what happened after? This was the question Dalton targeted in reviewing all info. Since Lucas was reported missing around 5:30 a.m., the disappearance window fell between 22:40 23:30. Based on distance from the vehicle site to deep forest areas, Dalton determined if Lucas left the vehicle and walked any direction, it would take at least 5 to 15 minutes to reach dangerous zones. This suggested Lucas didn't leave the vehicle immediately, or paused, or met someone. Dalton rechecked witness statements on Emily's departure time, confirming she left around 21:52. If she took the side road from the bar and drove toward Highway 50, her route was opposite the pass. But that timing couldn't be fully verified, and the 50-70 minute gap in her statement made Dalton wonder in the 2240 to 2330 disappearance window, who actually contacted him. To solidify data, he requested re-logging vehicle density in the area from 11/10 night patrol reports. Results showed almost no traffic on the small roads into the secondary forest, besides the found Bronco. This side road was used only by hunters, campers, or experienced hikers. This led Dalton to add a provisional conclusion: Lucas left bar at 22:03, lost signal approx 22:15, 22:20, disappeared between 22:40, 23:30. He circled 3 route points: bar exit, signal loss, vehicle found. Distances formed a narrow triangle, small enough for events in 20-30 minutes, large enough for any nighttime walk to be extremely dangerous. What worried Dalton most was Lucas's entire route, from bar lights to Kebler Pass darkness, showed no signs of intent to disappear. He carried no gear, told no one, had no reasonable purpose to leave the Bronco's safety on such a frigid night. Dalton looked at the map and saw the road from bar lot to pass as a brief town glow streak, then plunging into thick mountain black, a lightless, peopleless, witnessless void, where in under an hour, Lucas Moreno vanished, as if swallowed from the earth. That very unusual silence forced Dalton to return to the last people tied to the critical time frame. So the next morning, with the reconstructed timeline showing Lucas left the bar at 22:03 and lost signal around 22:15, 22:20, Dalton summoned Brandon Ashford to the sheriff's office to verify statements about Emily, since all data pointed to her time gap suspiciously overlapping Lucas's disappearance. Brandon entered the interview room with somewhat excessive confidence, crisp white shirt, still holding a to-go coffee cup, as if attending a routine meeting rather than a missing person case session. He sat, crossed arms, and opened with, "I'll help as much as I can. Lucas is my friend." Dalton didn't respond to the courtesy, started the recorder, then asked Brandon to recount the entire evening of 11/10, especially when Emily got home. Brandon spoke quickly, coherently, without hesitation. He said, "Emily left the bar around 9:30 p.m. and got home at 9:45, or at latest before 10 o'clock. Then they talked briefly about a relative's medical bill, after which Emily showered, changed, and went to bed early." He emphasized twice that Emily did not leave the house after that, and did not leave the bar late as some thought. When Dalton asked how he confirmed Emily's arrival time, Brandon answered without pause, "I saw the clock in the kitchen, 9:47. That precision made Dalton grip his pen tighter, bow to note, then move to the next. Did he hear Emily mention meeting Lucas at the bar? Brandon said no. He believed there was no special connection between them, and if witnesses saw something, they were mistaken. On the surface, Brandon's statement was smooth, feeling more like a prepared presentation than real memory. Dalton shifted. "Do you remember what Emily wore when she got home that night?" Brandon answered too quickly. "Black jacket, jeans, flat shoes." But flat shoes was an unprompted detail, not matching the bartender's description of high-ankle snow boots. Dalton noted 3 words: over-specific = planned. As the interview paused, Dalton asked Brandon to wait in the hall. He turned to Deputy Ortiz, just back from interviewing Brandon's housekeeper. Ortiz handed Dalton a brief note. Just 3 lines, but enough to shift the entire investigation. "Emily got home around 11 o'clock, or possibly later. I heard the door open but no lights on. Didn't hear anyone talking in the kitchen." Dalton clenched the paper, reread it all. Not 9:45, not 10 o'clock, but 11 o'clock, or later. That made Brandon's statement off by at least an hour from the only co-resident witness, and 11:00 plus exactly matched Lucas's map disappearance window. Dalton called Brandon back. Still the tense shirt, still crossed arms feigning cooperation. But this time, Dalton was direct. He asked outright, "You're sure Emily got home at 9:47? Brandon paused, 1 beat. A very short but clear to Dalton. "Then yes." Dalton placed the housekeeper's note on the table, slid it toward Brandon. The room fell silent. Brandon looked at the paper, eyes narrowing slightly, then sat straighter, hands clasped tight. He neither denied nor explained. Dalton waited. Finally Brandon shrugged, voice tinged with irritation. The girl mixed up the time. She often mishears. But that explanation worsened things. The housekeeper lived there, slept next to the kitchen, familiar with door sounds, no reason to fabricate. While Brandon clung unreasonably to 9:47, a unnaturally precise time, if not prepared. Dalton noted, alibi unreliable, time manipulated. Signs of concealment. Dalton continued asking about the afternoon 2 days prior, when Lucas and he met in the county building parking lot. Brandon called it just work talk, but dodged content. When asked if Lucas seemed stressed, Brandon said, no more than usual. This completely contradicted witnesses, seeing heated tones, Brandon pointing. Lucas flushed. The mismatch added many red underlines to Dalton's notes. By now, any outside observer could see Brandon providing an overly clean alibi for Emily, too clean to be real. Especially since Emily left minutes after Lucas, and her 50-70-minute statement gap fully overlapped the time Brandon claimed she was home. As the interview ended, Brandon stood with clear impatience, holding cold coffee, trying calm but shoulders stiff. Before Brandon left, Dalton said one non-accusatory but sharp line enough to make him pause at the door. Remember that time doesn't lie. Brandon didn't reply, just nodded lightly, then walked the hall, letting the metal door close behind, leaving the interview room thick with suspicion and pieces starting to shift from their original places. In Dalton's notebook, the first line appeared that seemed to change the case's color, possible coordinated alibi, signs of concealment. The next morning, as Dalton was reviewing Brandon's statement again and marking the key inconsistencies related to the period when Emily was unaccounted for, the SR team returned to the route up Kebler Pass to begin the phase. They called the final sweep, an effort to thoroughly search the 2 remaining trails that had not been fully checked over the previous 3 days. Mountain winds blew strongly from the West Elk Range, casting long, black shadows from the fir trees like spears thrust into the ground, while fog stretched in thin ribbons close to the forest, obscuring most of the rocky terrain where the SR team had to move. These were the most difficult trails to access. One skirted a narrow eastern slope, barely wide enough for a single hiker, while the other plunged down into a deep southwestern ravine, steeper and obstructed by numerous fallen tree trunks. Dalton stood at the junction of the 2 trails, watching the SR team split into 2 groups, each carrying climbing gear, safety ropes, and marking stakes. He knew full well that if Lucas had left the Bronco and tried to navigate through these areas, a single misstep could send him falling into a crevice deep enough to remain undiscovered for months. The first group, led by Deputy Wheaton, headed onto the eastern slope trail. It was a narrow path, with ground covered in sharp, blade-like loose rocks. A foot placed just a few inches off could send stones tumbling into the abyss below. Wheaton instructed everyone to move in single file, maintaining a distance of 3 to 4 meters, eyes scanning the ground for slide marks or broken branches. They spoke no words to avoid missing any unusual sounds that might indicate an injured person. There was only the crunch of rocks under boots and the whip of wind through dry branches. After nearly 30 minutes, Wheaton spotted a flat rock section with a slide mark about 2 meters long, the surface lightly polished as if something or someone had slid across it. He knelt to examine it closely, brushing away the thin layer of rock dust with his gloved hand. Though there were no fabric traces or blood, the shape of the slide prompted him to immediately radio Dalton, possible scuff mark. When Dalton arrived, he bent down for a closer look. The mark wasn't deep, but was clearly fresher than the surrounding erosion. If it had been caused by natural rockfall, the slide path would be jagged, but this long mark was continuous from top to bottom, more consistent with a human body slide. Still, Dalton couldn't confirm anything without accompanying physical evidence. He ordered it staked, photographed from an overhead angle, and noted possible slide mark, insufficient evidence. From there, the group continued for over 100 more meters, but the terrain grew increasingly dangerous, sloping rock faces, thinning trees, wind strong enough to unbalance less experienced members. Eventually, Whedon had to call a halt, marking the area as inaccessible without specialized climbing equipment. The second group, led by Deputy Ortiz, descended the southwestern trail, a darker, colder path blocked by countless long fallen tree trunks. The ground was soft, with layers of damp fallen leaves that could conceal footprints or drag marks, but Ortiz directed them to clear a path meter by meter, slow and steady. After about 20 minutes, they reached a steep drop leading to a dry creek bed, with jagged rocks and soil still moist from the light snow 2 days earlier. Ortiz spotted a few small depressions in the dirt, but they weren't uniform enough to confirm as human footprints. They could be from deer or coyotes. He noted them, but didn't flag the scene, as there were no additional related signs. Near noon, Ortiz's group pushed deeper to a low depression between two large trees, where wind barely penetrated, leaving thick layers of decaying leaves that could hide anything beneath the surface. They probed the ground with sticks and flipped over a few large branches, but found nothing noteworthy. Everything was eerily quiet, as if no one had set foot there for months. When both groups returned to the rendezvous point, Dalton cross-referenced their notes: one long rock slide mark, a few unclear depressions, and absolutely no personal items or signs of deliberate human movement. He stepped back and studied the topographic map pinned to a nearby pine tree. Though the forest in this area was vast, the terrain acted like a rocky funnel. If Lucas had left the Bronco and tried to walk in the dark, a slip on any steep section could send him tumbling into a deep crevice, trapped in a spot hard to detect. The slide marks and steep terrain reinforced that possibility, though without direct proof. Dalton wrote in his interim conclusion, "Victim may have slipped into inaccessible area. No direct evidence of foul play at search site." As the SAR team packed up their gear, winds from the West Elk picked up stronger, swirling over the cold ground and making the pine branches creak. The trails they had just covered seemed to sink back into the thin fog, silent, revealing no further clues. And at the end of that final search day, Dalton had to admit something he didn't want to say aloud. If Lucas had fallen into a place too deep, they might never find him for months or longer. That afternoon, after the SAR team completed the final search and returned exhausted, but with no conclusive evidence related to Lucas, Sheriff Dalton sat alone in his office, facing a growing stack of documents and a timeline spread across nearly the entire desk. He knew that without locating Lucas, the only thing left to pursue the investigation was the statements, and the most concerning part was that the statements from Emily Hartwell and Brandon Ashford no longer held up when cross-checked against witnesses and camera footage. Dalton turned on the desk lamp, pulled his notebook closer, and began systematizing each inconsistency, not to accuse anyone, but to understand which gaps in the story made Lucas's disappearance so opaque. First was Emily. She claimed she left the bar at 9:45, stopped by briefly, then drove straight to the lodge. But bartender Amy confirmed Emily arrived at 9:20 and stayed for nearly 30 minutes, drinking 2 beers, completely contradicting the initial statement. Witness Bill Tanner also confirmed Emily left the bar just 2 minutes after Lucas, not before him as she described. Dalton noted on the inconsistency chart, arrival time at bar, 9:20, 9:45. Departure time, 9:52 more 9:45, 9:50. Next was the statement about direction of travel. Emily said she took the side exit to the back parking lot to get her Civic and drove toward Highway 50. But Bill clearly stated he saw her looking toward Lucas's Bronco before heading down the narrow eastern trail, a direction that didn't match her described route at all. Dalton marked departure direction, east off south. The third inconsistency was the 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock window, a 50-70-minute gap that Emily said she spent calling a friend in Denver. But when Dalton asked for the phone number, Emily couldn't remember, wasn't sure who answered, and couldn't specify how long the call lasted. The night clerk at the lodge also didn't recall hearing a prolonged phone ring in her room. So Dalton noted 50-70-minute gap, unverifiable. For Brandon, the inconsistencies were even more pronounced. He insisted Emily got home at 9:47, based on the kitchen clock. But the live-in housekeeper confirmed the sound of the door opening only around 11 p.m., a discrepancy of over an hour, suspiciously aligning with Lucas's disappearance window. Dalton wrote, Emily's arrival time home, 21:47, approximately 23 o'clock. Additionally, Brandon described Emily's outfit upon arrival in very specific detail, too detailed for normal recollection, but it contradicted the bartender's description of Emily's shoes. This was a clear sign of a prepared statement. Dalton flagged, clothing details, overly specific, lacks naturalness. He sat quietly staring at the inconsistency chart. The red lines dense like a web, connecting the gaps between statements and reality. The numbers didn't add up. Emily was at the bar earlier than she claimed, left later than she claimed, went in the wrong direction, had an unverified gap afterward. Brandon placed her home unreasonably early. When pieced together, Dalton saw a clear pattern. Emily and Brandon were trying to conceal a specific period on the night Lucas disappeared. A period that perfectly overlapped with when Lucas left the Bronco and vanished from the pass. But the biggest issue loomed like a black ink blot in the middle of the analysis: no body, no injuries, no signs of struggle, no fabric scraps directly tied to Lucas, no blood-stained evidence, no footprints leading to or from the Bronco site. All the evidence found in the western forest, glove, water bottle, green fabric scrap, couldn't be proven to belong to Lucas or directly relate to him, and couldn't be used to challenge Emily's and Brandon's statements. Dalton leaned back and sighed. He knew inconsistencies in statements alone weren't enough to charge anyone, obtain a search warrant, or shift to criminal interrogation. Everything remained at the level of suspicion, without legal weight to advance further. Dalton closed his notebook, adding a final line: multiple inconsistencies suggest concealment, but without body or physical evidence, cannot upgrade case. This was the kind of situation he hated most in the job. Every sign pointed to something wrong, but the law required him to stand still when the most critical part of the picture, the victim's presence, was completely absent. And at that moment, Lucas's disappearance was the biggest blank no statement could fill. That evening, Dalton sat alone in the small conference room at the sheriff's office, with the timeline spread across nearly the entire table, alongside the topographic map, field notes, witness statements, and the 3 sealed evidence items awaiting analysis. He could feel the deadlock thickening in the air, but at the same time, he saw small pieces starting to form a vague shape. He knew that to assess the case's nature, he had to view all the data holistically: timeline, witnesses, scattered evidence, and terrain context. He started with the timeline, the only structured part in the chaos. Lucas left the bar at 22:03. Emily left later than claimed. Brandon provided a questionable, seemingly fabricated alibi, and Lucas lost signal between 22:15, 22:20, vanishing completely between 22:40, 23:30. These numbers didn't contradict each other, they contradicted the accounts of those involved. Regarding witnesses, bartender Amy and regular Bill Tanner both gave independent, matching statements, undermining Emily's credibility. Brandon's housekeeper confirmed Emily arrived home very late, completely dismantling the alibi. Brandon tried to build. One by one, they all pointed in the same direction. Emily and Brandon were concealing something, but concealment didn't equal criminal act. Dalton knew that all too well. He moved to the evidence: 3 items scattered in the western side forest: glove, green fabric scrap, water bottle. None bore distinguishing marks, no blood, no writing, no clear impact, nothing to confirm they belonged to Lucas. But Dalton couldn't ignore that all 3 appeared in the same area, less than half a mile from the Bronco. That suggested someone had passed through that route on a windy night, and likely slipped or stumbled. The positions of the evidence painted a picture of chaotic movement, not a normal hike. Connecting it all, Dalton turned to the topographic map, where he'd marked the dangerous trails. The 2 unchecked trails now had results: a long slide mark on eastern rock, a few unclear depressions in the southwestern ravine. Not definitive, not conclusive, but consistent with someone losing balance and sliding downhill. With all the data before him, Dalton began writing initial assessment on the whiteboard. He listed each point, reading silently as he wrote. 1. Emily and Brandon timelines clearly contradict independent witnesses. 2. Lucas's presence at bar showed signs of anxiety before leaving. 3. Lucas's travel direction and Emily's time gap suspiciously overlap. 4. Scattered evidence downhill suggests possible slip or push. 5. Rock slide mark consistent with impact. When he set down the marker, Dalton looked at the full whiteboard. Though no direct proof, a behavioral pattern was emerging. It didn't say Lucas was attacked, nor that he fell on his own. It said something unusual happened, something inconsistent with a simple accident. The clearest thing at this point, the likelihood of criminal elements, was high, very high. But Dalton also knew the second most important thing: suspicions must be proven with legal evidence, and he didn't have that. No body, no struggle marks, no direct evidence, no cameras on the pass road, no witnesses seeing Lucas after leaving the Bronco. Everything was inference from missing pieces. He reminded himself that the law doesn't run on gut feelings, even when gut feelings are more accurate than any chart. Dalton leaned back in his chair, staring at the low ceiling and listening to the steady hum of the heater in the corner. He thought of past cases, many with similar scattered signs, victims vanishing in mountain forests on cold nights, leaving only unprovable questions. But Lucas's case differed in one key way. The statements from the last 2 people connected to him were too loose, and the time they lost track overlapped unusually with Lucas's disappearance. Still, Dalton had to adhere to legal standards. He concluded in the report, case has high criminal potential, but insufficient basis to upgrade to formal criminal investigation. Continue as missing person, suspicious circumstances. That was the only step he was allowed, and the last he could take until new concrete evidence emerged. After 14 straight days of searching from the pass base to deep ravines, from main trails to western side forests, the missing person file on Lucas Moreno advanced no clear steps. No body, no weapon, no drag marks, no matching footprints, no impact on the Bronco, and the 3 forest items remained anonymous objects unlinked directly to the victim. Sheriff Dalton sat at his desk on the 14th day, the only light from an old brass desk lamp casting a dull golden glow over the file, like the exhaustion of the entire search team seeping through the pages. He flipped through the most critical notes from the past 2 weeks, contradictory timelines, mismatched statements, rock slide mark, steep path to Dry Creek, Emily's empty time gap, all suspicious data, but unable to stand under any legal standard. What he believed was abnormal wasn't enough to prove anything. At this point, any decision to upgrade to homicide investigation would be rejected for lack of a body or clear physical evidence. But Dalton couldn't and wouldn't let the file fall into accidental wandering. Mountain accidents usually had signs, disoriented footprints, items dropped in segments, deep slides with torn grass. Lucas's case had none of that. The Bronco was parked properly, not crashed. Lucas's behavior before vanishing showed him alert, not drunk or confused. And Emily's and Brandon's attempts to distort time made Dalton unable to accept a simple conclusion that Lucas wandered into the forest and fell. He opened the typewriter and typed the title, Case Status Update. Lucas Moreno Missing Person. He paused a few seconds before typing the next line, Status Unresolved. Suspicious Circumstances. This was a limbo state, not an accident, but not yet a criminal case. An uncomfortable gray area any investigator wants to avoid, but sometimes necessary when the truth hides too well. Dalton noted clearly in the report that large-scale search was suspended due to exhausted leads, but the file would remain open unresolved and could be reactivated any time with new information. He signed, stamped, and placed it in a red hard folder. the color for cases that can't be closed but can't be expanded. When he turned off the light, the office sank into darkness, leaving only the red folder on the desk as a reminder that Lucas's disappearance had no clear end. And for Dalton, this was never an accident, just a question without an answer. From early 1995, when the Lucas Moreno file was officially classified as unresolved, suspicious circumstances, any hope for a new breakthrough gradually thinned out month by month. Winter melted away, snow retreated from the mountain passes, then summer arrived, and the pine forest turned deep green again in a flat, silent way, as if it had never hidden a vanished person within itself. Sheriff Dalton and the Gunnison County Office kept the file in priority status, but the harsh reality of missing persons cases in the Colorado mountains was this: without a body, without new physical evidence, and without additional witnesses, the case would slowly drift into a static state, where all investigative activity became just a routine of rechecking old leads. Every month, Dalton would flip through the timeline again, review Emily and Brandon's statements, cross-reference the 3 scattered pieces of evidence found in the forest, and examine the topographic map, hoping to spot some detail he had previously overlooked. But every page was the same: contradictory timeline, inconclusive evidence, dangerous trail, and Emily's 50-70-minute gap still looming like an indelible black streak. In the spring of 1995, a group of climbers reported seeing something like a jacket in a crevice on the western side of the mountain, but when the patrol team arrived, it was just a torn piece of nylon blown in by the wind. In July of that year, a hunter reported hearing screams while passing through the remote southern forest near the pass, but follow-up checks found no signs of anyone. Both tips heightened the Lucas family's anxiety, but held no investigative value. By early 1996, Dalton sent a request to the Denver Crime Lab to analyze the green fabric scrap in the glove, hoping they could identify the fabric type or origin. But the technology at the time was too limited. They only determined that the fabric was most likely polyester cotton blend, and the glove was mass-produced. No fingerprints, no hairs, no blood traces, nothing to break through the foggy wall of the disappearance. When Dalton called the lab back to ask if they could store the samples for future analysis when technology improved, the answer was yes, but it was only a thin consolation. Throughout 1996, the Lucas family continued posting missing person flyers in town stores, an activity many saw as desperate, but which they persisted in. Some local hunters also volunteered to sweep through a few remote canyons, but all returned empty-handed. No confessions, no anonymous calls, no sudden appearance of new witnesses. Even the town rumors, which often flourished after disappearances, gradually died out when there was nothing to feed them. By mid-1997, Sheriff Dalton conducted a final review of the file before moving it to temporary storage. He examined every page of statements. Emily stuck to her inconsistent story, Brandon provided an alibi that the housekeeper had refuted, and the bar witnesses still affirmed what they had seen that final night. The witnesses hadn't changed, but the legal weight of their words remained stuck in a state of insufficient to charge. Dalton rechecked the trail map, considering the possibility of someone falling into rock crevices that SAR couldn't access. He reread the notes on the rock slide mark, the only detail potentially indicating human body movement, but it lacked any verifying elements. Each piece was like a door left slightly ajar, but none opened. In October 1997, exactly 3 years after Lucas vanished, the Gunnison County Office conducted its periodic review of unsolved cases. The expert panel noted clearly, no new leads, no possibility of expanding the investigation without a change in circumstances. The Lucas file, despite unusual indicators, could not be upgraded to a criminal investigation due to the lack of a body or physical evidence. They had to classify the case as cold case. Suspended investigative status. Dalton signed his name more slowly than ever. He placed the file in the third drawer of the cold cabinet, reserved for disappearances without footing. The red file slid into the slot, the pale yellow light casting emptily on the hard cover. The cabinet door closed, emitting a faint metallic sound in the silent room. That was the sound confirming that, after 3 years of waiting and exhaustion, the Lucas Moreno case had officially become a cold case. In the summer of 2013, nearly 2 decades after the Lucas Moreno file was pushed into the cold case cabinet, a fierce wildfire broke out in the Boulder Creek area, about 30 miles northwest of Gunnison. The flames spread faster than expected due to strong winds from the West Elk Range blowing down into the narrow valleys, burning hundreds of acres of forest and disrupting layers of accumulated undergrowth over the years. When the fire was contained, blackened streaks of earth wound through the pine forest, exposing areas previously covered year-round in snow and moss, virtually inaccessible to anyone for 20 years. A group of 3 hikers from Denver came to explore the post-fire landscape, one of whom had studied geology and ventured deep into the Boulder Creek area on a weekend outing, hoping to examine the soil structure after the vegetation layer had burned away. They entered a section of forest previously almost impossible to reach due to thick canopy and perpetually wet ground, but now, the ground revealed hard gray rock interspersed with charred roots and narrow crevices leading down to deep ravines. Around midday, when sunlight slanted at a sharp enough angle to shine into a small rock crevice on the slope, the lead hiker, a geology student named Marla, noticed an unusual white color against the dark burned soil. At first, she thought it was just a piece of pottery or cracked limestone from the heat, but as she got closer, she stopped abruptly. It was a section of bone, white, smooth, partially exposed from the fire-dried soil layer. Marla called her 2 friends over. They examined it closely and realized it wasn't animal bone. The curve, size, and porous internal structure indicated it was a human leg bone. Right nearby, they saw another smaller fragment, apparently part of a shin bone. Under the ash and half-burned leaves, a few scraps of dark fabric, charred at the edges, were also visible. None in the group had the expertise to determine age or time of death, but all understood that this area had likely not been entered by humans for decades, and what they found couldn't be something recently dropped. A silence fell, not the quiet of a post-fire forest, but the realization that they were standing before the remains of someone who had vanished long ago. Marla used gloves to mark the GPS location, then the 3 withdrew from the crevice, avoiding disturbing the scene. As soon as they returned to cell service, they immediately reported it to the Gunnison County Sheriff's Office. The report reached the office within minutes, and almost instantly, the county's response system was activated. When the information reached Sheriff Dalton, who had retired but still served as a part-time advisor, he immediately headed to the scene and arrived within an hour. Amid the scorched forest, where black earth still steamed lightly and half-burned tree trunks stood like black bone pillars, Dalton stood silently gazing at the newly discovered human bone fragments, understanding that the case he had agonized over for nearly 2 decades had finally shifted. That same afternoon, the forensics team from Montrose was dispatched to conduct initial identification and begin systematic excavation. As the area was cordoned off with marker stakes, technicians began brushing away thin layers of ash to reveal the underlying structure, and the deeper they dug, the more bone fragments appeared. Tibia, fibula, several detached vertebrae, arm bones, and finally the skull cracked in 2 places. Despite long decomposition, the shape and size indicated the remains of an adult male. But the most crucial factor was dental records, and Lucas Moreno's dental file had been preserved in the county archives for 2 decades. They took the remaining jaw, gently cleaned it with a soft brush, then compared it to the photocopy of Lucas's dental records. Dalton stood behind, saying nothing, as the forensic dentist matched each point. Tooth hash 14 had silver filling, perfect match. Tooth hash 31 slightly misaligned from bruxism, perfect match. 2 small cracks on the left canine, perfect match. In just a few minutes, the expert looked up, nodded slightly, and said the words Dalton had waited nearly 19 years for. This is Lucas Moreno. No one on the team said anything more. Wind blew through the canyon, carrying lingering ash, the dry rustling like the forest sigh, as it relinquished a secret buried too deep. After confirming identity, The next step was precisely locating where the body had lain. The hiker's GPS placed it on the edge of a narrow precipice, about 1.9 miles as the crow flies from where the Bronco was found in 1994. The rugged terrain, with steep drops at varying levels, meant that if someone fell from the edge, the body could bounce and lodge at multiple points. But the bone discovery site was right against a recessed rock ledge, a terrain feature that could catch a body falling at an angle. When the investigation team hiked from the old Bronco location to the remains site, it took over an hour and involved crossing many dangerous steep sections. This reinforced the hypothesis that Lucas could not have walked there himself in the dark, without leaving clear traces or personal items along the way. As forensics cleaned the intact long bones, they noted two significant findings. First, the left radius had a spiral fracture prior to death, a type common from twisting force or bracing during a struggle, not from high-fall impact. The curved break, sharp and uneven edges indicated peri-mortem injury, occurring while the victim was conscious. Second, the skull had a long linear crack running from the temple to near the left eye socket. This crack was clean, with clear force direction, consistent with a blow or strong impact before falling from the edge. If post-fall, skull fractures typically radiate in a star pattern, but this was linear, characteristic of direct impact. Forensics noted, linear fracture, likely pre-fall impact. This caused the entire team to stand silent for a few seconds. If Lucas was injured before falling, it meant he didn't lose balance by accident. He was attacked. But Dalton never allowed himself to jump ahead of conclusions. He asked forensics to continue cleaning the right rib bones. There, they found small scratches on the outer surface, not deep enough for a knife, but enough to indicate contact with a small hard object, possibly from being pushed or rolling against rock. Still, the most important sign was the body's position relative to the precipice. When reconstructing the presumed fall trajectory, forensics determined Lucas's body fell at a 40-degree angle, traveling horizontally 8 meters from the initial drop point to where it lodged. A natural fall rarely produces such distance, especially in steep terrain with many tree obstacles. Soil samples, embedded in foot bone cavities and on tibial ridges, matched the starting point higher up, with hard soil and little moss, a surface typical of ledge edges where people stand or move. But crucially, the soil on the bones didn't match near the Bronco site, but matched the red granitic soil unique to Boulder Creek, where the remains were found, and couldn't have washed from the Bronco area without direct transport. This confirmed Lucas was present at the fall site, not moved post-mortem. And if he was there, 1.9 miles from the vehicle, in October darkness, only two possibilities: he was forced in that direction, or he followed someone. Dalton stood at the rock edge, looking down to where the remains were found, a rugged patch of rock and earth, wind blowing constantly, as if trying to keep a secret exposed too late. As the forensics team carefully lifted each bone fragment and placed it in evidence bags, Dalton knew full well that the case before him had changed nature. This was no longer a disappearance, but a death bearing full signs of foul play. The body had finally appeared, and Lucas Moreno's death did not look like an accident. Thus, when the remains identification report was sent back to the Gunnison Sheriff's Office, confirming via dental records that the bones found in Boulder Creek were Lucas's, the decision to reopen the cold case was issued almost immediately. Within just 4 days, the county office officially reactivated the case dormant since 1997. The person assigned to take over was not anyone from the old Gunnison team, but Detective Aaron Calloway from the Major Crimes Unit in Montrose County. A new generation investigator specializing in re-evaluating old files with modern forensic standards. Aaron entered the Gunnison office on the morning of August 18, 2013, with a coded lock file bag, laptop, and a cool, sharp gaze that was anything but arrogant. She spent the first morning in the small conference room reviewing the entire summary file. Standing before the timeline board Dalton had built nearly 2 decades earlier, Erin sensed the tension and effort in every faded pencil mark. But she also knew everything on that board had to be rewritten to current standards. That afternoon, she requested the full 1994 file be brought to the large conference room, scene reports, photos of the Bronco, trail diagrams, witness statements, the limited lab analyses from back then, and most importantly, the 4 stored evidence bags. Leather glove, green fabric scrap, Glacier Springs water bottle, and the tire track casts from the scene. When the Montrose forensic support team arrived, Erin ordered full file standardization, meaning converting all 1994 data into a format analyzable under 2013 technology. This began with reopening each evidence bag in a clean room using new nitrile gloves and high-resolution scanning systems to create detailed images 10 times better than in 1994. The leather glove was scanned inside and out, recording fiber condition, creases, wear patterns, and any tiny adhering fibers. 1994 technology couldn't extract DNA from residual skin cells, but 2013 could. Erin requested touch DNA sampling from the wrist cuff and interior, though the odds of viable DNA after nearly 2 decades were low. The green fabric scrap, once deemed unidentified, was examined under a scanning electron microscope. Erin ordered polymer composition analysis, color fade, weave density, and cross-reference with Colorado clothing catalogs from 1992, 1995. She wanted to know if it was part of a jacket, knitwear, or climbing gear. The Glacier Springs bottle was rechecked for fingerprints using cyanoacrylate fuming, then DFO scanning for latent prints not visible before. Erin didn't expect much, but even a faint print belonging to Lucas or someone involved could shift the investigation. The 1994 tire track casts were digitized again. 2013 modeling tech allowed comparing tread wear depth, offset, and whether the tires were driven or slid into position. Erin also revisited the trail records. She requested updated Kebler Pass topographic maps via new LiDAR data to determine slope angles, signal loss points, and potential fall paths to the remain site. Once everything was categorized, Erin began writing the preliminary report, Reconstruction Phase 1, Data Consolidation. The focus of this phase wasn't conclusions, but standardizing all old information to escape 1994 technical limits. One of the hardest steps was re-evaluating witness statements. Emily Hartwell's, Brandon Ashford's, bartender Amy Willis's, Bill Tanner's, the housekeepers, along with Deputy Wheaton and Ortiz's reports, all entered into behavioral language analysis software. Small inconsistencies in Emily's account, departure time from the bar, direction taken, the unprovable 45-minute call, were flagged red. Erin drew no conclusions, but noted consistency score low. Brandon's statement received similar treatment. The unusual overlap between his timeline and Lucas's disappearance window was marked. Alibi of interest. Erin met Dalton during lunch break. He walked slowly, age steps, but voice steady. Both stood looking at the Boulder Creek map on the wall. Dalton pointed to the remain site, then the Bronco location. No reason Lucas would walk all the way there himself, he said. Erin didn't argue, she only replied. This file is old, but the mountains just returned the rest of the story. We need to read it with 2013 tools, not 1994. Back at her desk, Erin opened a new report page titled Cold Case Reactivation, Lucas Moreno. In it she wrote that this was no longer a simple missing person file. Bone comparisons, body position, and the linear skull fracture all indicated Lucas sustained impact force before falling. That was enough to change the entire approach. The file was no longer labeled missing person, but upgraded to suspicious death, requiring full forensic reconstruction. At the end of the day, before leaving the office, Erin paused to look at the evidence bags neatly arranged in the analysis room, items forgotten for nearly 2 decades, lying silently waiting for a time when technology was strong enough to pull the truth back to the surface. And now, technology had caught up. The duty to place each piece in its rightful position belonged to her. Over the next 3 days, Erin barely left the Montrose County analysis room, where modern forensic equipment ran continuously. Here, the re-examination phase entered its most critical stage, cross-referencing 3 key data groups: the fabric, soil samples, and bone trauma indicators. First was the green fabric fragment found in 1994, once dismissed as merely unidentified synthetic weave, but under the 2013 SPECS fiber scanning system and Raman spectroscopy analysis, Erin and the textile dye specialist examined every parameter: weave density of 52 threads per centimeter, polyblend fiber with nylon elastane blend, UV fading consistent with the Gunnison mountain climate. They placed the fragment under a scanning electron microscope, and a distinctive weave structure, the micro-rib horizontal pattern, emerged clearly. Erin immediately requested a comparison with photos taken from the Silver Elk Bar on the night Lucas disappeared. In the blurry series of images captured on 1994 film, Emily Hartwell was wearing a navy blue workout jacket, but what caught Erin's attention was the sleeve, subtle horizontal ribbing, matching tone and material common in women's athletic wear from the 1990s. When Erin requested a weave map reconstruction, the results matched at the microstructural level, the key feature being the double-stitched seam at the sleeve edge, a stitching style found only in 3 1993 Trail Peak running jacket models. And Emily had confirmed in her statement that on that night she was wearing a jacket, don't remember the brand, dark blue. In 1994, police couldn't analyze it in depth, but 2013 was different. The fabric wasn't just similar, it was confirmed to match the type, structure, and degree of wear from friction against the Bronco's armrest. Erin noted in the report, fabric match probability, 92%. Next was the soil sample, the key to pinpointing the impact location. The forensics team extracted soil from tiny crevices still adhering to the inner surfaces of Lucas's femur and ribs, using trace mineral analysis and comparison with the local soil database. Gunnison area soil has fairly uniform mica and quartz content, but soil along Spur Trail 3, located southwest of the Bronco's position, had a rare characteristic higher than average kaolinite clay ratio, along with red ferric oxide streaks from stream-worn rocks. The SMED scan results on soil particles embedded in Lucas's bones showed exact signatures of laminar ferric oxide, perfectly matching samples collected from Spur Trail 3, about 1.4 miles as the crow flies from where the vehicle was parked. This refuted the 1994 hypothesis that Lucas headed north from the vehicle. He had moved, or been forced to move, into an area not covered in the original search perimeter. The soil also revealed fine mountain sand, mixed with sharp-edged gravel, characteristic of the narrow slope leading up to the rocky outcrop where the remains were found in 2013. The exact path couldn't be determined, but forensics had narrowed down the area of the struggle. Finally, the bone fractures, the most crucial step in determining the nature of death. Lucas's skeleton showed multiple injuries, but the 3D CT analysis focused on 3 points: a spiral fracture in the left humerus, linear sharp fractures in ribs 4, 5, and a depression in the frontal skull prior to the fall. Erin consulted a trauma forensic expert. If Lucas had accidentally fallen from 40-60 feet, fractures would typically be chaotic, asymmetrical, and concentrated on the first impact body parts. But here, all 3 injury groups bore signs of force applied before the fall. The left arm bone fractured in a twisting angle, typical of being grabbed, twisted, or restrained. The ribs fractured in a straight line, consistent with a strong shove to the chest. The skull depression didn't resemble impact with sharp rocks, but rather a blow from a hard object with a 3-4 centimeters wide surface. Additionally, the leg bones showed no open fractures, meaning the posture during the fall was likely a sudden push, with no defensive bracing or attempt to maintain balance. When reconstructing the 3D impact model, the expert concluded this fall was not accidental, The victim experienced an anterior force shove, meaning Lucas was pushed. Even the distance from the push point to the fall site matched a loss of balance trajectory rather than a voluntary jump. Aaron placed the three results side by side, the fabric matching Emily's jacket, the soil matching the off-route spur trail Lucas had taken, and the fracture patterns proving forceful impact. They weren't absolute proof, but combined, they formed a forensic chain more consistent than anything in the 1994 file. In her end-of-day log, Aaron wrote, "Forensic reevaluation strongly suggests struggle, displacement, and intentional force prior to fall." That was the first time in 19 years that science had spoken clearly. Lucas Moreno's death was not an accident, not a simple fall, but bore signs of deliberate action. That very conclusion paved the way for the next step in the reinvestigation. Detective Aaron Calloway spent the next 2 full weeks on the most difficult but vital task, reconstructing the entire timeline of the night of October 11, 1994, using 2013 technology. Something the Gunnison investigators that year had no access to. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation's Digital Analysis Center assisted in reopening all surviving data sources, film photos from the Old Creek gas station camera, NOAA temperature wind rain records, 2012 LiDAR terrain maps, and archived lunar phase records. Everything was compiled into a 3D space-time model, accurately depicting movement, outdoor visibility, and vehicle speeds on each segment leading to Kebler Pass. Aaron started with the first confirmed point. Lucas left the Silver Elk Bar at 10:03 p.m., per the bar's camera, in a tense state. The Old Creek gas station camera 0.7 miles away captured the Bronco passing at 10:11 p.m. Though the image was just a light streak, the headlights and windshield silhouette matched Lucas's 1989 green Bronco. NOAA weather data showed westerly winds at 18 miles per hour, temperature 27 degrees Fahrenheit, low humidity, conditions that dispersed sound quickly, and limited mountain visibility to under 40 meters. When Aaron input the new terrain data, the model showed that for Lucas to reach the area near Spur Trail 3, it would take at minimum 27 minutes walking from the parked vehicle, or 10 minutes if led via a shortcut over the rocky slope. This placed the time he left the vehicle around 10:25 p.m. Cross-referencing forensic results, Lucas died between 10:35–10:50 p.m. This was too tight a window for a simple accident. Aaron then examined Emily Hartwell's timeline. In 1994, Emily stated she left the bar around 9:40–9:50 p.m., drove straight home to Gunnison Meadows, and stayed there from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m. Brandon Ashford, her boyfriend at the time, confirmed the alibi that Emily was home, didn't leave. But in 2013, Aaron recovered a scratched film reel from the Silver Elk's exterior security camera, an old analog type. After applying contrast enhancement techniques, Aaron spotted a woman exiting about 6–7 minutes after Lucas. Based on height, hairstyle, and jacket, it was Emily. Her departure time was confirmed as 10:09 p.m., 25 minutes later than her statement. This timestamp aligned with Lucas passing the gas station. In putting the data into the 3D model, Aaron uncovered a chilling detail. If Emily left at 10:09 p.m., driving her Honda Civic via Elk Road, then turning onto 12A, she could reach the Spur Trail Junction in 12–14 minutes. That time, 10:23 p.m., perfectly matched the window when Lucas was determined to have left the Bronco. But what about Brandon's statement? In 1994, investigators accepted the alibi due to lack of contradicting evidence. But Aaron was the first to closely review the Ashford household housekeeper's 1994 statement. She had said Emily came home much later, not at 10 p.m. The forgotten audio recording was recovered by Aaron from a microcassette. The housekeeper's voice clearly stated, "I heard the door open around after 11, maybe 11:10 or 11:15. That statement shattered the entire alibi. Per the model, Emily could drive from Spur Trail 3 back to Gunnison Meadows in 35-40 minutes, meaning she could arrive home at 11:10, 11:18 p.m. Matching the housekeeper. Aaron cross-checked the full route. 10:03 Lucas leaves bar, 10:11 Bronco on camera, 10:20, 10:25, Lucas leaves vehicle, 10:35, 10:50, Lucas dies. If Emily followed the modeled route, her missing period, the time unaccounted for in 1994, fell exactly into the 10:15, 11:05 p.m. window, precisely when Lucas was attacked. Brandon's alibi was completely invalidated. He hadn't seen Emily at home as claimed. At that point, Aaron compiled all data into a new timeline. The alignment of fracture patterns, soil traces, bar departure times, death window, and Emily's 50-70-minute gap formed a straight, thin but razor-sharp connection. When the 3D model overlaid the three timelines, Lucas's movement, Emily's possible route, and the projected death window, Aaron paused for a few seconds. This was no longer vague suspicion, but an absolutely aligned temporal structure, showing Lucas and Emily present in the same remote area of Kebler Pass at the exact moment of Lucas's death. And unlike 1994, this time no data supported Emily Hartwell's statement. Every timestamp, every piece of evidence, every forensic analysis pointed to one thing: the period Emily disappeared from the map was when Lucas Moreno died. That was the truth. That 2013 technology finally dragged out of the shadows. With the temporal foundation clear, Aaron moved to the next phase of the reinvestigation, returning to the people who witnessed the night of October 11, 1994. Witnesses once limited by memory, by primitive technology, and by the lack of a body for comparison. But now, with Boulder Creek having returned part of the truth, Aaron believed the old accounts could reveal details they hadn't known were important back then. The first person she sought was bartender Amy Willis, who had left the Silver Elk and now managed a small bar elsewhere in town. When Aaron turned on the recorder and asked questions, Amy showed no surprise about the case reopening. She just sighed and said, "I always knew something was off that night." When asked for more details about the interaction between Lucas and Emily, Amy frowned for a moment, as if searching for faded images. Then she said, "I remember Lucas looking toward Emily 2 or 3 times, but there was one time, the last one before he left, he said to me, 'I need to talk to her for a minute.'" Aaron immediately followed up, "You mean Lucas actively wanted to speak with Emily?" Amy nodded, "Yes. But Emily got up and left before he could approach. I think he gave up and headed to the parking lot." This detail wasn't in the 1994 file, possibly because no one then considered tension or conflict between Lucas and Emily. But Lucas wanting to speak with Emily before leaving opened a new possibility. The two met after leaving the bar, not by chance, but at Lucas's initiative. Amy also noted that Emily seemed restless, unfocused, drinking faster than usual that night. This, combined with the new timeline, suggested Emily may have tried to leave to avoid talking to Lucas or to intercept him elsewhere. Leaving the bar, Aaron felt the dust of time beginning to fall from details once thought meaningless. But the most critical data from the re-interview phase came from a witness barely featured in the old file. A ranger working at the Pawnees station in 1994, Ray McConnell, who that year was on night duty in an area about 5 miles from Spur Trail 3. When Aaron tracked him down, Ray was retired and living in a small cabin near Crawford, but his memory of 1994 was as sharp as fresh snow. When asked if he recalled any vehicles on the Spur Road that night, he didn't answer immediately, but stood up, opened an old drawer, and pulled out a faded brown notebook. "I logged license plates of vehicles I saw on night shifts," Ray said. "Not required, just habit." He flipped a few pages to October 11, 1994, and handed the notebook to Aaron. The shaky handwriting was still legible. 10:22 p.m., black Jeep Cherokee Colorado plate 2A, 7413, heading toward Spur Trail 3. Aaron felt her heart race for a moment. That plate matched exactly Brandon Ashford's 1994 Jeep, per county registration records. When asked why he remembered it so clearly, Ray explained, "No one uses that road at night, except poachers or lost folks. I thought it odd because the Jeep was going pretty fast, no fog lights on despite the bad road. I watched the taillights for a while, because it was heading right toward where they later found the bones." Aaron asked further, "Did you see the vehicle come back out?" Ray shook his head. "No, I was at the station all night. No Jeep came back that way." This detail cut straight through the alibi Brandon had relied on to clear scrutiny in 1994. If Brandon's Jeep was on Spur Trail 3 at 10:22 p.m., there was no way he was home as claimed. And the 10:22 p.m. timestamp eerily matched the forensic window when Lucas was forced from his vehicle. Aaron returned to Ray's kitchen table, opened the LiDAR map on her laptop, and asked, "How far from where you saw the vehicle to the remains site found this year?" Ray tapped the map with a pencil. "About 1.5 miles via shortcut. Vehicle couldn't go farther, but a person on foot could." That distance also matched the 1.9 miles as the crow flies from the Bronco to the remains site. Aaron noted, Brandon's Jeep present near Spur Trail 3 at critical time. Leaving the cabin as evening fell, long streaks of sunlight filtered through mountain gaps like slow-motion film. Aaron stood by her car, closed her eyes for a few seconds to connect the new pieces. Lucas wanted to talk to Emily left, later than stated, Brandon's Jeep appeared exactly when Lucas left his vehicle. Emily had a 50-70-minute unaccounted window matching Lucas's death. Brandon had no other vehicle besides that Jeep. All the scattered details from 1994, once too weak to be evidence, now, under modern forensics and supplemented statements, were reassembling into a logical chain that nothing in Emily's or Brandon's accounts could conceal anymore. Aaron understood clearly. This case was no longer a missing person. This was a witnessed death, with lies told, and a night of October 11, 1994, gradually emerging clearer than ever before. That's why Aaron moved on to the next piece that she knew would play a pivotal role in the entire structure of truth. Brandon Ashford's black Jeep Cherokee. Ranger Ray McConnell's record of Brandon's license plate on Spur Trail 3 at 10:22 p.m. had already collapsed the entire 1994 alibi, but Aaron needed more. She needed physical evidence tying that Jeep to the distinctive red granitic soil area where Lucas's body was found. The problem was that the Jeep no longer existed. Brandon had sold it in 2003, but the maintenance records were still at Western Ridge Auto, the shop that had serviced Brandon's vehicle throughout the 1990s. Aaron drove to the shop and met the retired former owner, who still kept all the paper repair records. He pulled out a large cardboard box filled with thin folders, stained with oil. Aaron located the one labeled Ashford, Brandon Jeep Cherokee, 2A7413. The file was unusually thick. Brandon had brought the vehicle in for maintenance far more frequently than average. The most notable entry was the service record, dated October 14, 1994. Just 3 days after Lucas disappeared, it read, "Cleaned wheel wells, removed thick red mud caked on the front right due to small rocks jammed in." The technician's signature was Howard Dorian. Aaron immediately asked the shop owner about this detail. He vaguely remembered and said, "There's red mud around Gunnison too, but if it's that bright red kind that sticks like paint, there are only a few places, one near Paonia, and the other the side trails around Boulder Creek. That soil there is really sticky. It doesn't come off in one wash." Aaron photographed the records, sealed them in a bag, and contacted the lab. "Check if there's any old soil sample left in storage from the wheel well, evidence cleaned at the shop." They said it was unlikely, but she requested it anyway. While waiting, she used the new data to reconstruct the geological model. The red ferric oxide soil on Spur Trail 3 in the Boulder Creek area had iron oxide levels high enough to create a rare deep red hue, unlike the soil in the town of Gunnison. It was a locally distinctive soil, a natural signature. When the results from the shop's evidence storage came back, Aaron held her breath in a small box from 1994. Long forgotten, and now retrieved at her request. There were still a few fine soil particles clinging to an old oil paper bag. The lab ran SMED scans, and the results appeared on the screen: ferric oxide lamina, 32%, kaolinite, 18%, mica, 12%. A 1-1 match with the soil samples collected from Lucas's body location and Spur Trail 3 area. Erin pushed her chair back and sat motionless for a few seconds. This was no longer inference. This was independent physical evidence, existing since 1994, confirming that Brandon's Jeep had been in the distinctive red soil area where Lucas was found. No one could explain this as coincidence. Erin continued reviewing the maintenance records. On October 15, 1994, Brandon replaced the front brake pads due to unusual wear. Brake pads typically wear unevenly, only if the vehicle brakes hard or repeatedly on steep, rocky terrain, a characteristic matching Spur Trail 3, a notoriously difficult stretch with steep drops and sharp turns. In the record, the technician added a note: scrapes from rocks on the undercarriage. Likely from trail driving, Erin noted, the Jeep hadn't just been near the side trail, it had gone deep into it. She compared the direction of the soil adhesion on the undercarriage with the incline map of Spur Trail 3, sharp-edged granite rocks, red sandy soil base, high body vibration, even at speeds of just 10-15 miles per hour. Everything matched the technician's 1994 notes. Erin opened her laptop and compiled the data. Jeep 2A7413, recorded on Spur Trail 3, at 10:22 p.m. Distinctive red soil adhered to undercarriage, noted by shop 3 days later, residual soil particles in the wheel well storage box. Perfectly matching the soil where Lucas's body was found, unusual brake pad wear, indicating hard braking on steep terrain. In the 1994 records, Brandon claimed he was home all evening, didn't use the vehicle, and Emily confirmed this. But the 2013 forensics told the opposite story. The Jeep had been at the exact location of Lucas's death, at the exact time Lucas disappeared. Erin called the lab, checked for any gravel or mineral traces still on the box. An hour later, the results arrived. Among the remaining adhesion traces were angular granite particles, a stream rock type not yet rounded, characteristic of the steep slopes above the Boulder Creek area. That type of granite fragment doesn't appear on any main roads around Gunnison. Erin noted, vehicle location match, high certainty. She added the detail from Ranger McConnell, no sighting of the Jeep, returning from the Spur Trail 3 entrance. This meant the Jeep could have left the area via another route or turned back on a small forest path not visible from the station. But the lack of a return sighting aligned with the extended time frame past 11 p.m., the time the housekeeper heard the door when Emily got home. Erin compiled all the data into a single report. Brandon's Jeep was present at the location linked to Lucas's death at the exact time with undeniable soil traces. The alibi was completely invalidated, not just by conflicting statements, but by science, minerals, stratigraphy, and physical data. As Erin sat quietly staring at the evidence board in front of her, she felt each piece, Lucas, Emily, Brandon, Spur Trail 3, and the Jeep, gradually locking into a single straight line, leading back to the night of October 11, 1994. For the first time in 19 years, the truth was no longer hidden in overlapping statements, but lay right there in the red soil, stuck to the wheels, in the minerals, fibers, and coordinates that could not be faked. To verify and strengthen the entire chain of logic, Erin forwarded the file to the Colorado State Forensic Reconstruction Lab in early September 2013. Within 2 weeks, the team there uploaded all the terrain data, weather, bone locations, fracture vectors, cliff height, soil samples, and inferred movement directions from mineral traces, along with the hiker's GPS, into a 3D scene reconstruction system. This was the first time the Lucas Moreno case was recreated using 2013 technology, the kind that could accurately simulate impact forces, fall trajectories, and body-object interactions with errors of only a few percent. Erin was present in the simulation room on the morning the system completed the initial draft. The room was dark, with a wide curved screen spanning nearly 180 degrees, blue light spilling onto the 3D model of Spur Trail 3, the red granitic side trail, jagged with sharp rocks, leading up to the cliff edge, where Lucas's body was found nearly 2 decades later. The first screen displayed the natural fall simulation, a man 5'11" inches tall, 181 pounds, losing balance on loose soil. The fall vector showed the body rotating slowly, center of gravity tilting to one side, landing 13 feet from the drop edge. But Lucas's body was found nearly 26 feet from the possible fall point, at a 40-degree angle, with a longer trajectory than any accident simulation. When Aaron requested the second simulation, fall after light push, the system showed a new vector, a 40-55 Newton force from the front chest, causing faster loss of balance. But the trajectory was still not long enough to match the remains location. Aaron crossed her arms, studying the path closely. "Increase the force," she said. The technician adjusted to 90-120 newtons, the level equivalent to a strong push from an average adult. The simulated body was thrown back half a step, center of gravity flung off the ground, rotating over the shoulder axis, then falling at a 38-45-degree angle. This fall trajectory landed exactly on the map of the 2013 bone discovery site. Error 1.38 feet. This was the first time in the investigation that a physical simulation perfectly matched the actual body location. Aaron said nothing for a few seconds. Then she requested 3 more angles: push from left, push from right, and direct frontal push. The simulations ran continuously. Right push trajectory 2 deviated. Left push body rotation unnatural, no bone position match. Frontal push perfect match. This confirmed the force on Lucas came from the front, not the side. Next, Aaron asked the system to reconstruct the aggressor's height, hand direction, and push trajectory based on Lucas's left radius fracture location. The 2013 forensics confirmed the spiral fracture on the left radius occurred when the arm was twisted strongly inward, a type of injury common when the victim is face-to-face and the assailant grabs the wrist or forearm to control them. The 3D system displayed the interaction simulation, a person facing Lucas using their right hand to strongly grip Lucas's left wrist, twisting inward to pull him off balance. The model automatically calculated the aggressor's height, approximately 5'4", 5'7". Aaron frowned. Lucas was 6'0". The aggressor was significantly shorter. She requested entry of Emily Hartwell's 1994 recorded height, 5'6". The screen displayed a uniform green match. When Brandon Ashford's height that year was entered, 6'2". The screen immediately flagged a mismatch vantage point incorrect, meaning with Brandon's height, the push would come from too high an angle, creating a different fall trajectory and arm fracture vector. The system rescanned the entire motion. Lucas's center of gravity, the opponent's center of gravity, wrist twist direction, arm length, ground slope. In all cases, 5'6" inches height was the best fit for the real scene trajectory. Aaron requested the next simulation, simulate possibility of both people at the scene. The system built 2 models, Lucas near the red soil edge, the second person facing him 28-39 inches away, optimal distance for the left wrist spiral fracture. A third person higher up 3-6 feet, able to observe, but not in direct contact. Aaron viewed the 2-person and 3-person models, but the model only perfectly matched bone data with exactly 2 people. Lucas and the 5'4", 5'7" inches aggressor. She quickly noted, interpolated aggressor height, =sign Emily Hartwell range. The forensic technician continued simulating skull impact force. The linear fracture on the left temporal bone only matched when Lucas's head struck a rock edge at a low height of about 18-24 inches. The height matching the protruding rock ledge just below the fall point. This was the type of injury from losing balance after a push, not skull shattering from a high fall onto a sloped rock face. The fracture length matched a small rock edge, not a large flat surface. The system confirmed it matched local rock samples. Aaron requested simulations of two-handed push and one-handed push. Results displayed: two hands force too strong, trajectory 10 feet longer than actual. One hand's trajectory matches actual. Push from behind, no left wrist spiral fracture. Push from left, wrong twist direction. No fracture match. Only one model fit the aggressor standing in front. Using right hand to strongly grip Lucas's left wrist. Twist inward and push to unbalance him. This attack method matched Emily Hartwell's height, arm strength, and reach, and did not match Brandon's build. Aaron requested two additional parameters: Lucas's movement speed when pushed, and likely standing position before the fall. Data showed Lucas standing 24 inches from the rock edge, not a natural position for a nighttime hiker, suggesting he was forced back while facing the second person. The reconstructed vector also showed Lucas's feet caught in the distinctive sticky red soil of the Boulder Creek area, matching soil in the foot bones and tibial ridge. Finally, Aaron requested the push to scare, not intending to kill simulation. Reducing force to 40-50 newtons. Result: Lucas would fall backward but land too short, non-fatal. Only increasing force to 110 newtons, consistent with a strong push from a 143 pounds person, produced the trajectory matching the remains. When the final model displayed, Aaron stood motionless. The screen reconstructed the night of October 11, 1994. Lucas near the red soil edge, facing a person much shorter than him. That person extended their right hand, gripped Lucas's left wrist, twisted inward, and pushed. Lucas was flung from his stance, body directionless, rotating down the rocky slope and disappearing into darkness. No simulation suggested Lucas slipped on his own. No algorithm supported a natural accident, and all data from height, force angle, standing position, to fracture direction converged on one forensic conclusion: the push that sent Lucas falling could only have come from a person whose height and reach perfectly matched Emily Hartwell that night. That conclusion demanded the next unavoidable step. Detective Aaron Calloway summoned Emily Hartwell to the investigation office on an early October morning, just 3 weeks after the 3-dead simulation confirmed the push force and aggressor position matched her perfectly. Emily entered the room with forced calm, no longer showing the defiant attitude of the 1994 interview. She sat across from Aaron, hands clasped, eyes constantly avoiding the harsh white light shining on the metal table. Aaron began with soft, gentle questions, as if the meeting were merely routine file supplementation. But the moment Emily started recounting the timeline of October 11th, the shift was clear. She no longer insisted she left the bar at 9:45, but said around close to 10. When Aaron pressed, Emily corrected again, maybe 10:05, I don't remember exactly. That very wavering told Aaron the defensive wall had begun to crack. She turned a page in the file in front of her and gently asked, Emily, in your 1994 statement, you said you didn't see Lucas after leaving the bar. Do you stand by that? Emily hesitated, lips pressed together briefly before answering, I might have seen him heading toward the parking lot, but I didn't go there. I left by a different route. Aaron didn't challenge or press. She simply placed a black and white photo from the bar's front camera on the table, showing Emily leaving at 10:09 p.m., not 9:45 p.m. Emily stared at the photo for a long time, then looked away. I really don't remember. I was stressed that night. Aaron kept her voice low and steady. Stressed to what degree, Emily? Enough to change the time you left the bar? Emily didn't answer. Her hands gripped so tightly her knuckles went white. Aaron moved to the next detail, this time sharper. In that 1994 session, you said you were home before 10, but the housekeeper heard the door after 11. Emily looked down at the table, slightly trembling. She remembered wrong. She always went to bed early. I didn't want to drag others into this. No one's dragging anyone, Aaron said, voice even as a cold blade. We're just cross-referencing data. Then she turned the laptop screen toward Emily. Displaying the 3D model, showing Emily's Civic could drive from the bar to Spur Trail 3 in 14 minutes. If you left at 10:09, you could reach the side trail by 10:22. Emily frowned, trying to stay composed. I didn't go that way. Aaron calmly placed an evidence bag on the table, the green fabric fragment analyzed by Raman spectroscopy. We found a fabric piece matching type, weave structure, color, and UV fading level with the sleeve of the jacket you wore that night. Emily swallowed hard, for the first time looking up at Aaron, eyes wide. No. Impossible. I never went into the woods. Who says that's my jacket? Aaron didn't answer verbally. Instead, she produced the analysis report, 92% match probability, plus photos of Emily wearing a navy jacket with horizontal ribbing. Emily shook her head repeatedly, as if trying to back away from the paper in front of her. That's just coincidence, she said louder, voice almost choking. Dozens of people had jackets like that. Aaron tilted her head, looking straight into Emily's eyes, for the first time in the interrogation, asking a breakthrough question. Emily, if you didn't go to Spur Trail 3, then why did Brandon's Jeep have granitic red soil stuck to the undercarriage? The kind of soil that only exists exactly where Lucas's body was found. Emily stopped breathing for several seconds. Her jaw clenched, then she turned away, avoiding Aaron's gaze at all costs. I didn't drive the Jeep. I don't know where he went. Aaron spoke each word slowly. The October 14, 1994 service record states, cleaned wheel wells due to thick red soil adhesion, that red soil. She slid the analysis report in front of Emily. Matches 1-1 with the soil in Lucas's bones. There was no escape. Emily began breathing rapidly, one hand covering her mouth. I don't know anything. I didn't do anything. That night I just wanted to go home. Aaron waited. No interruption, no pressure. That quiet but merciless silence always made liars break themselves first. Emily trembled harder, trying to hold on. I just drove around a different way. I didn't want to talk to Lucas that night. Aaron immediately locked in. You just said you didn't want to talk to Lucas, meaning you knew he wanted to meet you. Emily froze, realizing she had inadvertently confirmed the bartender's statement. Lucas had wanted to talk to her before leaving the bar. Aaron opened the 3D impact model, letting Lucas's fall trajectory glow in the narrow room. Emily, forensics show Lucas was pushed, not a fall, not an accident. Someone stood in front of him, gripped his left wrist, twisted inward, and pushed. Emily closed her eyes, tears welling but no words coming. Aaron ended with a flat but steel-sharp statement. And that person's height, 5'6", matches you exactly. The room sank into thick silence. The contradictions Emily had clung to for 19 years had no foothold left. When Aaron turned off the 3D screen, only the harsh white light remained on the metal table and Emily's trembling hands. In that moment, Aaron knew the defensive wall Emily had built for 2 decades had begun to crack. That evening, when she returned to the office, Aaron spread all her notes out on the table. A heavy but sharp feeling inside her made one thing clear. The pieces that had seemed scattered and fragile for nearly 2 decades were now connecting into an irreversible logical structure. She turned on the small yellow lamp at the end of the table, opened her laptop, and began building the comprehensive evidence links table. A forensic matrix connecting all the data: the glove, the fabric scrap, the red dirt, the skid mark, the Jeep's position, the 3D simulation, and the timeline. Her goal was not just to reach a conclusion, but to prove scientifically that every piece of evidence led to the same point. The moment Lucas was pushed off the red dirt edge at Spur Trail 3 on the night of October 11, 1994, she started with evidence item number 1, the leather glove found in 1994. When the old crime scene diagram was digitized again, Aaron noticed the glove was located on the southwest slope corner, near the path leading down to Spur Trail 3. Strong winds that night could have blown anything far away, but according to NOAA, the wind direction was westerly, meaning light objects would be pushed eastward, opposite to where the glove was found. That meant the glove fell in place and was not blown there. The 3D model showed the glove's position matched the spot where someone gripping or struggling could drop an item during impact. The glove carried no DNA, but the 2013 forensic analysis confirmed its size matched the type Lucas usually wore, not strong enough to claim it was his, but enough to place it in the chain of events. Aaron underlined, glove = location of initial struggle. Evidence item number 2. The blue fabric scrap, a clue completely overlooked in 1994. Aaron placed the Raman spectroscopy analysis next to the photo of Emily at the bar. Fabric material, weave structure, horizontal ribbing, UV fading, double stitching, all matched the 1993 Trail Peak running shirt sample. But more importantly, the scrap's location, it was caught on a small bush on the trail, right before the narrow steep section that Lucas was determined to have passed through, or been forced to pass through. Aaron used the simulation. A strong twist or pull from the front could tear the scrap from the sleeve edge. Result: the push-twist simulation matched the scrap's drop location. Aaron underlined the second line, fabric scrap = snag during pushing struggling. Evidence item number 3. The granitic red dirt, the key link tying Brandon's Jeep to where Lucas died. Not just red dirt found in many places in Gunnison County, but the type with a unique mineral signature specific to Spur Trail 3 and the edge of Boulder Creek. The SM EDS results on the dirt sample in Lucas's bones showed a ferric oxide, kaolinite, mica ratio that matched exactly the dirt stuck under the Jeep in 1994. 3 independent sources, dirt in the bones, dirt under the vehicle, and dirt near the body, all matched 1-1. Aaron highlighted boldly, red dirt = Jeep present at Lucas's fall location. This destroyed Brandon's entire alibi and simultaneously placed Emily in the incident area since she was riding in that very Jeep. Evidence item number 4. The stone skid mark. The 2-meter-long skid on the flat rock surface had been overlooked in 1994 because there was no body. But in 2013, when the 3D simulation reconstructed the fall trajectory, Lucas's fall vector led straight to the skid mark location, meaning that was the point his body slid across after being pushed. Notably, the skid was not a freefall type, but one of being hurled forward then falling diagonally down the slope. Forensic comparison of the rock surface and fall angle from the model, error only 0.3 meters. Aaron wrote, skid mark = intermediate fall point. Evidence item number 5. Brandon's Jeep position. Ranger Ray McConnell recorded license plate 2A7413, appearing on Spur Trail 3 at 10:22 p.m. Not just coinciding with the time Lucas left his vehicle, but exactly matching the forensic determined time Lucas was forced to leave his Bronco position. The vehicle's location was confirmed by the log and by the dirt samples in the wheel wells. Aaron marked, Jeep = present at scene, when Lucas was pulled deeper into the trail. Evidence item number 6. The 3D simulation. This was the strongest result in the entire file. The simulation showed Lucas did not fall accidentally. No model produced a matching fall trajectory if he simply lost balance. Only the pushed from the front simulation, with right-hand force, pusher height 5'6", 5'8", matched the actual fall path, the spiral fracture in Lucas's left arm bone, and the linear skull crack. This height matched Emily, not Brandon. Aaron underlined the final line. Push force = consistent with Emily. Evidence item number 7. The 2013 reconstructed timeline. When Aaron overlaid the 3 timelines, Lucas's route, Emily's vehicle route, Brandon's vehicle appearance, the 70-minute period, Emily was missing. Aligned exactly with Lucas's time of death frame, from 10:09 p.m. to 11:12 p.m., was exactly 63 minutes. Forensic determined Lucas died around 10:35, 10:50 p.m. This near-perfect overlap completely collapsed Emily's and Brandon's statements. When Aaron connected all the arrows, the linking lines formed a complete forensic corridor. The glove at the initial impact point, the fabric scrap indicating a snag during pushing. The red dirt proving Brandon's Jeep was at the exact spot Lucas fell. The skid mark as the point Lucas's body slid through when pushed. The 3D simulation proving the push from a 5-6 inches person. The timeline showing Emily disappeared at the exact time Lucas died, and the Jeep's presence, sealing that they were in the same area at the same time. All arrows, all physical data, geological traces, and 3D simulations converged without deviation. On one point, Emily Hartwell. Not a single piece of evidence supported the accident hypothesis. There was no sign Lucas wandered into the woods on his own, and no detail opened another direction of suspicion. The dirt, rock, fabric, bones, time, fall trajectory, pusher height, and Jeep position all combined into one single shape, a short but violent confrontation, ending with the push that sent Lucas off the red dirt edge of Spur Trail 3 on the cold night of October 11, 1994. Aaron sat looking at the comprehensive table, feeling clearly as if the 19 years of silence in the file were closing into one seamless, complete line. For the first time since 1994, Lucas's death was no longer a vague hypothesis, but a unified, clear, and irreversible forensic chain of events. With that structure as the foundation, Aaron spent the next 3 full days in the large conference room of the Gunnison office, doing what no one had fully done since the year Lucas disappeared, building an event map, a comprehensive diagram that included not just the timeline and evidence, but also motive, personal conflicts, unusual behavior, and the movements of everyone involved on the night Lucas Moreno died. On the huge whiteboard, Aaron started with the first starting point, the conflict between Lucas and Brandon. 1994, witness notes from 2 county office employees confirmed Lucas and Brandon had argued heatedly just 2 days before Lucas died. Aaron wrote on the board, 10/10, 4:30 p.m., conflict of unknown content. After reviewing Lucas's files again, Aaron noticed he had once inspected a safety report at the small plant Brandon operated. If that was the source of the conflict, Lucas might have held information Brandon did not want exposed. Aaron did not conclude, just wrote a threatened interest. From that marker, she drew an arrow to October 11th. Lucas wanted to meet Emily one more time at the bar, details the bartender Amy had only clearly stated after nearly 20 years. The words "I need to see her for a minute" not only showed Lucas was proactive, but also hinted he was holding something important, something related only to Emily or to her and Brandon. Aaron wrote, unfinished intent to talk possibility of meeting again outside the bar. After leaving the bar at 10:03 p.m., Lucas headed straight toward Kebler Pass, a direction completely unusual compared to his daily routine. Aaron carefully marked, movement direction illogical if Lucas intended to go home. That indicated either Lucas was going to meet someone or he was lured out of town. Meanwhile, Emily left the bar at 10:09 p.m., nearly 25 minutes later than her statement, and Aaron wrote in red, time period intentionally distorted. When overlaying the 2 routes on the map, Aaron saw that Lucas and Emily left the bar close enough to meet somewhere on the way out of town. She circled a point, the small road branching into Spur Trail 3, where Brandon's Jeep was seen at 10:22 p.m. This was the first intersection in the event map, Brandon's Jeep plus 10:22 p.m. timing, plus heading into the side trail. All aligned with the time frame when Lucas left his vehicle and was forced deeper into the woods. Aaron connected this arrow with a line. Brandon said he was home, false alibi. From there she built the second branch, the stage position of the Bronco. Lucas's vehicle was parked carefully, wheels turned at the right angle, engine fully off, rearview mirror adjusted off. Not like Lucas's habit, who always set the mirror low to reduce nightlight glare. Aaron underlined vehicle parked not by Lucas staged abandonment point. The distance from the Bronco to where Lucas died was 1.9 miles, not traversable randomly. From terrain data, side trail number 3 was the only route leading to the cliff edge where the body was found. Combined with the red dirt in the bones and on the Jeep, Aaron drew a solid line. Lucas taken from parking spot to spur trail 3, not walking voluntarily. Next was the evidence chain: glove, fabric scrap, skid mark. The glove at the initial struggle spot before the narrow, steep section. The blue fabric scrap dropped right at the next narrow point, where terrain forced two people close together. The stone skid mark right in the middle fall path, the impact point before Lucas's body plunged down the recessed rock layer. Erin linked the three pieces of evidence into three chain links: impact, arm pull, push. Then she incorporated the 3D simulation results: pusher height equals sign 5'6", 5'8". Required force about 90, 110 newtons, force direction from front, right hand gripping Lucas's left wrist. All these parameters Erin grouped into one box on the map. Perpetrator physical profile matches Emily Hartwell. In contrast, Brandon's height and reach did not match the simulation, were inconsistent with the spiral arm fracture in Lucas, and could not produce the accurate fall trajectory. Erin marked beside it, Brandon does not fit direct force roll. But Brandon's Jeep being at the exact trail showed he was at or near the scene at that time. She wrote, Brandon equals sign same time, plus same locase support roll. After nearly 5 hours of non-stop work, the entire event map appeared as a network with no gaps. 1. Lucas argued with Brandon. 2. Lucas wanted to talk to Emily about something. 3. Emily left bar, later than stated, route unknown. 4. Brandon's Jeep appeared at exact intersection leading to spur trail 3-5, Lucas's Bronco. Stage, Lucas forced to walk into side trail 7, glove, fabric, red dirt, skid, 3D simulation, all match 8. Lucas pushed from front 9, pusher height matches Emily. Erin stepped back, looking at the whiteboard covered in arrows, connecting lines, and notes. No detail stood alone anymore. No link was vague. Every event from the bar to spur trail 3 had closed into a tight arc. When she circled the entire diagram, its shape resembled a story that had always existed, only waiting for enough pieces to emerge. Lucas did not die in an accident. He did not take a wrong turn. He did not slip in the dark. Lucas was pushed, and everything forensic, timing, terrain, evidence, statements, all pointed to the same single conclusion. With the event arc complete, and only 2 people able to fill the final gaps, Erin summoned Brandon Ashford in the afternoon of October 12, 2013, exactly 19 years, and 1 day after the night Lucas disappeared. Not for symbolic pressure, but because by now the forensic file, event map, and 3D simulation were too clear. The only part still blurred lay in Brandon's statements. When he entered the interview room, Erin noticed the confidence he had shown in the 1994 session was gone. Brandon was older, salt and pepper hair at the temples, but the biggest change was in his eyes, a defensive tension too tight, like someone who knew the game was slipping away. Erin started with simple questions, ones Brandon had answered 19 years earlier. You said Emily got home before 10 p.m., right? Brandon nodded, but avoided her gaze, as if that answer had worn thin from too many repetitions. Erin did not object or press. She simply placed a sheet of paper on the table, the recovered transcript from the housekeeper's microcassette, containing the line, I heard the door open after 11, around 11:10, 11:15. Brandon stared at the paper for a long time, then leaned back slightly in his chair, hands rubbing together. She got it wrong, he said quietly. Erin kept her expression unchanged. Brandon, we've listened to the entire tape again. She was very clear, and not just the tape. The 3D route simulation for Emily shows she could have gotten home at 11:12. Matches the housekeeper's statement. Brandon fell silent. The whole room fell silent. That was the pause Erin always left open, because in that silence, liars often lost their footing. When Brandon could no longer stand it, he sighed, voice hoarse. Okay, maybe she got home later. I don't remember exactly anymore. Erin noted the response, then continued. You said you didn't leave the house that night, but Ranger Ray McConnell recorded Jeep 2A 7,413 on Spur Trail, 3 at 10:22 p.m. How do you explain that? Brandon looked straight at Aaron for the first time, defensive reaction obvious. I don't remember going anywhere. I might have driven around that area. But it had nothing to do with Lucas. Nothing to do with it? Aaron tilted her head, flipping to another report. The red dirt under your Jeep matches 1-1 with the dirt where Lucas's body was found. 3 sources under your vehicle, in Lucas's bones, and at Spur Trail 3. All identical. This time, Brandon swallowed hard. He did not try to argue logically, but with silence. The silence of someone calculating an escape. Aaron did not give him too much time. Brandon, she said, voice lowered, soft yet sharp. Do you want to stick with saying the Jeep was never at Spur Trail 3? Brandon lowered his head, hands clasped. He did not answer. His silence was the answer. Aaron wrote in her notebook, Brandon admits Jeep present at Spur Trail 3, she continued. How do you explain the 10:22 timing when Lucas left his vehicle around 10:20–10:25? Your Jeep appeared exactly then. Just coincidence, Brandon said, voice choked as if dragged out. Aaron tilted her head another inch, eyes sharp like a thin blade. No one coincidentally appears on the exact route leading to where someone dies, 3 minutes after that person vanishes from his vehicle. Brandon did not refute. His shoulders hunched. His fingers rubbed together non-stop, as if trying to wear down the rising pressure. Aaron moved to the final blow, the one she knew would crack Brandon's statement shell completely. You said Emily got home at 9:47, but you just admitted she got home later. So at 10:22, when your Jeep was at Spur Trail 3, where was Emily? Brandon looked up, eyes flashing panic, as if yanked to stand on the edge before being pushed. Aaron continued slowly. The event map shows Lucas wanted to meet Emily at the bar. Emily left the bar 25 minutes later than stated. The Civic route could reach Spur Trail 3 in 12–14 minutes. You were at the same trail at 10:22. Emily was not home. Lucas was forced to leave his vehicle 10:20–10:25, and Lucas's body was found 1.9 miles from the Bronco, exactly the route you took. Brandon brought his hand to his face, rubbing hard at his temple. Aaron did not stop. Brandon, every forensic arrow points to the same spot, and if you keep the old statement, you'll be responsible for obstructing the investigation. Brandon let out a small laugh, not a real laugh, but the kind from someone realizing every exit was locked. He took a deep breath, then dropped a line, voice hoarse and tired. Okay. Emily got home very late. I knew. Aaron did not move, just added, Brandon confirms Emily did not get home at 9:47. He continued, that night, we argued. I didn't ask where she went. She took the car, and I took the Jeep. I drove up to that area because I thought she was there. Aaron stopped writing, looked up. Why did you think Emily was at Spur Trail 3? Brandon clamped shut. That was the sign he had said too much. Aaron did not push further. She did not need to. Brandon's words had broken the lock that had kept this file sealed for nearly 2 decades. He admitted the Jeep was where Lucas died. He admitted Emily did not get home early. He admitted going to look for Emily at the exact time Lucas disappeared. Those 3 points were the final pieces in the event map Aaron had built. Not a single part of Brandon's statement stood anymore, and for the first time in nearly 20 years, the truth had a complete shape, not from a confession, but from the cracks in the words of the person who had tried hardest to hide it for the longest. The arrest warrant for Emily Hartwell was signed on the morning of October 18, 2013, after the Gunnison County prosecutor reviewed the entire forensic report by Detective Aaron Calloway and concluded that the chain of physical evidence, the reconstructed timeline, the 3D simulation, and the crumbling statements from both Emily and Brandon had surpassed the threshold of reasonable doubt, providing strong enough legal grounds to issue a warrant for the charge of manslaughter under suspicious circumstances under Colorado standards at the time. The decision was signed in a closed-door meeting, without prior notice to the media and with no leaks allowed, to prevent the risk of Emily fleeing Montrose, where she was living and working part-time as an accountant for an outdoor gear store. When Aaron received the faxed warrant, the red seal from the prosecutor's office slanted across the edge of the paper like a heavy streak of light. 20 years of silence in the case had finally seen its first legal movement. She barely had time to nod to her deputy before leaving the office, driving 90 minutes to Montrose with 2 supporting deputies, carrying a thick indexed file, the green fabric scrap, the gloves, the red soil, the 3D simulation photos, the 2013 timeline. No one spoke on the way. There was only the sound of the SUV's heater fan and the tires gripping the dry autumn road. At around 10:14 a.m., the vehicle stopped in front of the Yellow Aspen motel complex, where Emily had been renting a room for over a year. Aaron stood in front of room 207, taking a deep breath before knocking 3 firm times. Emily opened the door in a gray sweater, hair hastily tied back, her face showing clear unease, despite trying to stay calm. She saw Aaron, then saw the arrest warrant being held out in front of her, along with the even and grave reading, "Emily Hartwell, you are under arrest in connection with the death of Lucas Moreno, occurring on October 11, 1994. You have the right to remain silent." Emily's face went pale, her lips trembled, and her hand gripped the doorframe, as if letting go would cause her body to collapse. There was no screaming, no resistance, just the silent collapse of someone who knew that her 20-year flight had ended. As the cold cuffs touched her wrists, Emily uttered only one near-unconscious sentence, "I didn't mean," but Aaron had heard too many similar lines in her career to know that the rest, "to kill him," would never be voluntarily completed by Emily. As Emily was led out of the hallway, a few motel tenants stood silently watching. Some pulled out phones to record, while Aaron kept her hands in her coat pockets, eyes fixed on the subject, but her expression completely unreadable. News of Emily Hartwell's arrest spread faster than anyone in the office had predicted. Just 2 hours later, local news outlets were running headlines. Cold Case 1994, reopened. Arrest made in Lucas Moreno death. 3 hours later, the Denver Post published a long analysis on modern forensic technology solving old cases. By that evening, all Colorado TV stations led with the arrest using the same frame, Emily bowing her head as she walked to the police car, face ashen, hands cuffed in front. The Gunnison community, where the disappearance had once mobilized the entire town to search the mountains for 2 weeks, was nearly shaken. Those who had thought Lucas died in an accident stood outside the Safeway supermarket, talking nonstop. Those who had suspected Emily but never dared say it aloud, whispered, "Finally, it's come." And Lucas's family, who had accepted the silence of the mountains and forests for nearly 2 decades, were called by the sheriff's office that afternoon with news of the arrest. There were no cheers, no explosive tears, just a silence so long that Aaron could hear their every breath over the phone, then Lucas's mother's soft voice. "Thank you for not forgetting my son." As night fell over Gunnison, the news had spread beyond county lines to the entire state of Colorado. The disappearance, once buried under the snow of 1994, now had an arrest. Emily Hartwell, the woman who had claimed she knew nothing about the night Lucas vanished, now sat in a Montrose holding cell, awaiting her first arraignment hearing. And with the cuffs on her wrists, 20 years of silence had finally been broken. The preliminary prosecution hearing opened on October 22, 2013 at the Gunnison County Courthouse, just 4 days after Emily Hartwell's arrest in Montrose. The courtroom was packed, not only with reporters from the Denver Post, Colorado Sun, and KRDO 13, but also with Gunnison residents who had searched for Lucas in 1994. People who had aged but never forgotten the night he disappeared. Emily was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hair tied neatly, face exhausted after 3 nights in custody. Brandon Ashford sat in the related defendants' row, not handcuffed but restricted in movement, eyes downcast throughout the session. County Prosecutor Marlene Jeffries opened the nearly 300-page file and read out 3 charges against Emily: second-degree manslaughter, concealing and tampering with the crime scene, and providing false statements to investigators in 1994. Her voice was not loud or harsh, but each word dragged through the air like a blade cutting the room. For Brandon, the prosecution presented a separate charge: obstruction of justice for intentionally providing a false alibi, concealing the Jeep's travel route, and failing to report critical information about Emily's presence on the night Lucas died. Jeffries began with a clear presentation, structured so coldly that the courtroom nearly held its breath. The 2013 forensic evidence determines that victim Lucas Moreno did not die from an accidental fall. He was pushed with force from the front, lost balance, and plunged down the ravine at Spur Trail 3 between approximately 10:35 and 10:50 p.m. on October 11, 1994. She moved to the first slide, the 3D push reconstruction. As the model appeared on screen, many in the courtroom gasped. Some covered their mouths. Jeffries used a laser pointer on the simulated figure, applying force, height 5'6", 5'8", matching Emily Hartwell, the impact position, the victim's left wrist rotation angle, and the fall trajectory could only be produced by someone of the defendant's height and reach. It does not match anyone else in the record. She moved to the second slide, the green fabric scrap. The fabric found in 1994 was previously unidentified. In 2013, Raman spectroscopy showed a 92% probability match in weave structure and color to the jacket Emily wore that night. Emily bowed her head deeper. No one could see her eyes, but her entire body tensed like a string pulled to its limit. The next slide showed images of the gloves, water bottle, rock skid marks, the red soil sample position in Lucas's bones, and SEMED's results from Brandon Ashford's Jeep wheel well. Jeffrey said, the granitic red soil with ferric oxide, kaolinite, mica signatures matches 1-1 between the body, the scene, and Brandon Ashford's Jeep undercarriage. The Jeep was recorded entering Spur Trail 3 at 10:22 p.m. per Ranger log, exactly when the victim was forced out of the vehicle. The courtroom buzzed, and the judge had to bang the gavel to restore order. When moving to the crime scene concealment charge, Jeffries presented 1994 evidence. The Bronco was not slid down the slope, but parked deliberately. Steering wheel turned precisely. Engine fully shut off. Vehicle position unusual compared to Lucas's habits. There was no reason for Lucas to park there and walk into the freezing 27 degrees Fahrenheit forest at night, she said. But there was reason to believe the vehicle was parked to conceal the actual altercation location. Next, she presented the false statement charge, Emily's 1994 statement, leaving the bar at 9:45, home before 10, was proven completely false by camera footage, witnesses, and the housekeeper's statement. The defendant not only lied, Jeffries said, but deliberately fabricated a timeline to conceal her absence at the exact time of Lucas's death. Emily clenched her hands until her wrists went white, but still said nothing. Finally, she turned to the charge against Brandon. Reading the indictment caused the courtroom to nearly erupt in murmurs. Brandon Ashford is charged with obstruction of justice for intentionally impeding the 1994 investigation, providing a false alibi for Emily and concealing the Jeep route, while also giving dishonest statements in the 2013 reinvestigation. Brandon glanced up briefly, eyes bloodshot, then looked down again. In the back of the courtroom, some pursed their lips. Others nodded slightly as if they had waited years for this. Erin sat in the investigator's row, saying nothing, just observing both defendants' reactions. For her, this was not a moment of triumph, but a necessary one. The legal movement to bring the Lucas Moreno case from the darkness of a cold case into the light of legal truth. When the judge confirmed the charges would proceed to the pretrial hearing, Emily was led out in near absolute silence. But outside the courthouse, the crowd was packed, dozens of microphones raised, many shouting, 20 years. Finally, someone is held accountable. News of the charges spread across Colorado in just hours. Evening broadcasts ran the Chiron, 2 arrested in 1994, Gunnison death, breakthrough in 19-year cold case. And for the first time in 19 years, the Lucas Moreno disappearance was no longer hanging in doubt. It had entered the formal prosecution phase, where the law would measure the truth just exposed by forensics. The trial of Emily Hartwell opened in March 2014 at the Gunnison County Courthouse, in a scene unprecedented for this usually quiet town. Long lines of reporters setting up cameras at the gate, TV vans parked along both sides of Ohio Avenue, and crowds of local residents arriving as early as 6 a.m. to secure seats in the courtroom. For many of them, this was not just a trial, it was the remaining chapter of a story that had dragged on for 2 decades, one many had lost hope in. Then unexpectedly revived by modern forensic technology and Detective Aaron Calloway's persistence. That morning, Emily entered the courtroom in a light gray business suit, requested by her defense attorney, hair neatly bunned, face so gaunt that a few in the room whispered they almost didn't recognize her. Brandon sat in the row for ancillary defendants, not being tried jointly in this session, but required to appear for cross-examination when called. Judge Lydia K. Donnelly, known for her sternness, presided with an expressionless face, but her eyes showed the case's gravity. Prosecutor Marlene Jeffries opened with a powerful statement: "This trial is not about a mountain, not about a fall, but about the truth. The truth that 2013 forensics pulled from under rock and soil after being buried for nearly 20 years." She signaled, and the large screen behind lit up, showing the 3D reconstruction of Spur Trail 3 on the night of October 11, 1994. The red dirt road, rocky slope, and Lucas's fall point, like a bone fragment in the Black Forest backdrop. The courtroom fell silent, not from sensational imagery, but because this was the first time crime scene reconstruction technology was presented in a criminal trial in Gunnison County. The forensic expert from the Colorado State Lab took the witness stand and began explaining step-by-step terrain modeling, wind force, skid marks, fall trajectory, bone damage, and the height of the pushing figure. When the slide shifted to the natural fall simulation, the trajectory and landing point were only 13 feet. But when the pushed simulation appeared, the virtual body of Lucas was shoved back half a step, pivoted, and fell exactly where the bone fragments were found in 2013. An error margin of 0.42 meters appeared on screen like a steel pin piercing the room. Murmurs rose, then were silenced as Judge Donnelly reminded everyone to maintain order. The expert continued, the required push force was 90 to 110 newtons, direct frontal. Height of the pushing figure, 5'6" inches to 5'8", thick prosecutor. Jeffries asked, the defendant's height, 5'6" Sitbrock. The height of ancillary witness Brandon Ashford, 6'2", does not match. The courtroom began to hum. Emily sat motionless, eyes down, while her defense attorney tried to stay calm and objected on grounds of visual prejudice risk. But the objection was overruled. The forensics were scientifically sound, and the simulation was admitted under Colorado standards. The trial moved to the second witness, Ranger Ray McConnell. He took the stand with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent his life in Colorado's mountains and forests. When the prosecution asked if he remembered the Jeep on the night of October 11, 1994, he opened his old notebook and pointed to the exact page, 10:22 p.m. Jeep Cherokee Colorado Plate 2A, 7413, entering Spur Trail 3. Jeffries asked, "Do you doubt your handwriting? Any chance of misremembering?" Ray shrugged. "I don't misremember. I wrote it down because it was odd. I've been a ranger for 32 years. No one takes that road at night." Emily's defense attorney tried to interject. "You saw the vehicle enter, but it could have exited another way," Ray replied immediately. "That road has only one way out. I was at the station all night, and no Jeep came back." A woman in the gallery raised her hand to her mouth to stifle a sharp breath. Brandon, seated behind, closed his eyes for a few seconds, head bowed low. When the ranger left the stand, no one in the courtroom still viewed the Jeep's presence as coincidental. The next witness was bartender Amy Willis, whose initial 1994 statement only noted Lucas and Emily were both at the bar. But in 2014, her memory was sharper. When the prosecution asked, "Do you remember the last thing Lucas said before leaving the bar?" Amy bit her lip, glanced briefly at Emily, and said, "He said, I need to talk to her for a minute." The defense attorney immediately objected on grounds that memory over 19 years could be faulty. But Jeffries presented the 2013 supplemental statement where Amy repeated the exact same line. Two consistent statements, objection overruled. Jeffries continued, "What time did Emily leave the bar?" 10:09. "Are you sure?" Camera confirmed it. "I saw her leave the door just minutes after Lucas." During cross-examination, Emily's attorney tried to shift. "Did you see them talking in the parking lot?" Amy answered, "No, but I saw both were unusually tense." Then Jeffries called Emily to the stand for cross, not to directly accuse, but to see how she explained timeline contradictions. "Miss Hartwell," Jeffries began, "can you repeat the time you left the bar on October 11th? Emily bit her lip. "I don't remember exactly, around 10 or 10:09 p.m., as the camera recorded." Emily faltered. "I might be mistaken by 20-25 minutes. I had no reason to remember precisely." Jeffries did not raise her voice, just asked the next question, as if checking basic math. "Did you leave town via Elk Road and turn onto 12A? No. Then why does the 2013 positioning model show a Honda Civic, like the one you drove, could reach Spur Trail 3 exactly when Brandon's Jeep entered? 10:22 p.m. Emily fell silent. Jeffries ended the cross with a final question, sharp as a knife. "If you did not go to Spur Trail 3, why was a fabric scrap from your sleeve found on that trail?" Emily dropped her head. Her attorney stood to object, but the judge ordered both to stop arguing. The courtroom was enveloped in a nearly physical silence. The silence of years of doubt, years of deadlock, and years of waiting. Next, forensics presented 12 more slides, skid marks on rock matching the fall vector, red soil mineral match between Lucas's bones and the Jeep undercarriage, push force matching Emily's height. Jeep presence at the scene, all linked into a chain, all pointing to one conclusion. Emily's attorney tried to counter with the argument that simulation does not prove motive, but Jeffries immediately replied, "This is not a motive case. This is a truth case. The truth that the victim was pushed, not that he fell." Throughout the afternoon, each witness, each slide, and each simulation segment tightened the forensic noose around Emily's statements, making the picture of the night of October 11, 1994 clearer by the minute. When the trial adjourned for the first day, reporters unanimously agreed on one assessment: the 3D reconstruction changed everything. And in that courtroom, under the lights illuminating the model of Lucas being pushed off the mountain edge, no one, even those who once believed Emily innocent, could continue calling that death an accident. Over the next 11 days, the trial continued with the same intense tension, and by late afternoon on the 12th day, everything reached an irreversible conclusion. As the Colorado sunlight slanted behind the West Elk Range and the last rays filtered through the courtroom windows, the verdict was officially delivered. Emily Hartwell stood straight, her hands clenched so tightly they turned white, listening to every word Judge Donnelly read in a slow, unembellished voice that was enough to make the entire room feel the weight of each syllable. "Defendant Emily Hartwell," she said, "based on the entirety of the record, modern forensic evidence, witness testimonies, 3D crime scene reconstruction, and the defendant's own unexplainable inconsistencies, the court sentences you, second-degree manslaughter, 18 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections." A sharp gasp rose from the gallery, but the courtroom remained orderly. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. No tears, no collapse. She simply stood motionless, as if she had finally run out of ways to maneuver. Her lawyer placed a hand on her shoulder, but she did not react. Prosecutor Jeffries showed no sign of triumph, merely bowing his head to take notes, as though this was simply the inevitable outcome of a legal logic chain that had reached its end. Immediately afterward, the judge moved on to the decision regarding Brandon Ashford. The court concluded that Brandon had provided false information, obstructed the investigation, and fabricated an alibi for Emily during the early stages of the case, but had not directly participated in the actions that led to Lucas's death. The sentence, 2 years suspended sentence, supervised probation for 3 years. Brandon nearly slumped into his seat, partly from relief, partly from knowing that this suspended sentence came with a permanent legal stain and the cold stares from many in the town of Gunnison. Something that might weigh heavier than any prison term. As the trial concluded, Judge Donnelly declared that case file number 94-117-GN, the missing person and death of Deputy Sheriff Lucas Moreno, was officially closed after 19 years in limbo. Those words echoed in the courtroom like the heavy clang of a vault door being locked for the final time. Detective Aaron Calloway stood at the back, quietly closing the thick case file. Its pages flipped through hundreds of times by her and the investigation team during the 2013 reopening. For her, this was not a victory, but a belated response to a colleague who had vanished into the shadows of Colorado's mountains, and a closure that the Moreno family had waited nearly 2 decades for. Outside the courthouse, there were no cheers, no chaos, only the familiar silence of Gunnison as the cold early spring wind swept across the square. Some residents gathered in small groups, speaking in low voices. Others simply stared toward the mountains, where Lucas had disappeared in 1994, as if they could finally exhale after a journey far too long to endure. Lucas Moreno's file, after 19 years, was closed. But the cost of the truth, for Emily, for Brandon, for Lucas's family, and for the entire Colorado community, would linger far longer than any sentence. From the perspective of today's American society, the story of the Lucas Moreno case in Colorado is not just a dramatic journey of solving a crime, but also a reflection of very real issues surrounding justice, transparency, and personal accountability in American communities. The fact that a missing person case, initially classified as an accident in 1994, was only clarified nearly 20 years later, thanks to modern forensic technology and the persistence of one investigator, offers an important lesson. The truth never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to be uncovered. The technology of 2013 illuminated details that once seemed meaningless: the green fabric matching Emily's jacket, the red granitic soil stuck under Brandon's Jeep, and the 3D simulation confirming Lucas was pushed rather than having fallen on his own. In today's American life, this reminds us that data, science, and precision are increasingly becoming the foundation for countering bias, prejudice, and deception. Another lesson comes from the very mistakes made by Emily and Brandon. Their efforts to cover up, fabricate alibis, alter timelines, and withhold information seemed like they might help them escape trouble in the short term, but instead prolonged the consequences for 2 decades. Modern America, from workplaces to family life, still sees many similar cases: a small lie, an act of concealment, an attempt to avoid responsibility, can turn into a snowball that grows until it is uncontrollable. Finally, the story highlights the irreplaceable role of community and persistence. From the ranger who kept an old notebook, the bartender who remembered a seemingly trivial comment, to the group of hikers who accidentally discovered the bones. In America's vast and fragmented society, this reminds us that sometimes the smallest details from ordinary people become the crucial links that bring the truth back to its rightful place. And the final lesson: justice may come late, but it only arrives when we, as individuals and as a community, never stop acting for it. Thank you for following the entire journey of unraveling this nearly 2-decade-long case. If you found the story meaningful, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. See you in the next video, where we'll continue shedding light on truths once hidden by time.